Well, good morning, very early morning, good afternoon or good evening to all of you. Welcome back. This is our second session of this meeting. And we are going to spend all the meeting today on technology. So this is Technology Day. I would like to start right away with Brian and his presentation. Brian, you have the guest speakers that will come a little later, and you'll be introducing them, right?
That's right, Stavros.
Good. So, please begin.
Perfect. Thanks. And thanks, Diana. Great. There we go. So thanks very much, Stavros. I'm really excited to share some of the highlights of our working group activities for this past quarter on behalf of our team, Vanya, David, and Sandeep, also our IESBA correspondent member, Joanna Field, our outstanding staff support of Cam and Deanne, and then also with some additional assistance from our resident tech ethics groupie, I guess, Laura Friedrich. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so you've all received the cover note for this agenda item, which has the details of our update. So in my presentation today, I just want to briefly highlight a few of the key points for you with respect to our progress on non-authoritative materials, so NAM, fact-finding and outreach activities. And then, as you know, and Stavros already alluded to, we've got a couple of additional presentations, one on blockchain and internal controls, and also an update on the IESBA's technology workstream from that group. So I'll be brief to ensure that our guests have ample time for their presentations as well. And just before I get into the meat of my presentation, I just want to point out that staff have kindly prepared and released an IESBA technology initiative update in April that covers both the working group and task force components. So if anyone's looking for more update style resources in addition to what's in our various agenda papers, that document is also available. Okay, next slide. Okay, with respect to non-authoritative materials, there have been some renewed discussions around this subject in regards to their varied purpose, format, development methodology. So whether IESBA is directly or collaboratively working with external partners on putting that NAM together, and also on the review and approval approaches. So given that this remains an active conversation that extends beyond the work of just the technology working group, I'll just note on this slide the various NAM formats that we're pursuing as part of our work that are really simply trying to match the information and the desired message with the intended audience, and that we're working with staff and the planning committee to determine the appropriate review process for individual pieces on a case-by-case basis. As we've noted in the past, the core of all of our NAM will be formed by applied elements, things like scenarios, illustrative examples, questions to ask when managing technological changes and implementations, and then also compiling insights from experienced stakeholders. Although there's always some research and academic backdrop to these, we're really aiming to provide content that's directly practical to end users. And then finally, for those who aren't yet aware, I want to mention that IFAC has recently set up for us a dedicated landing page or a focus page, so to speak, for the central dissemination of these and other resources and related materials. And because that is still relatively new, I'm just going to, in the chat window, drop if I can find my chat window. I'm just going to drop the link for you to take a look at it at your leisure. If you can't see the chat window, you can also get there from the top right area of the IESBA homepage. There's a focus areas link in pretty small print, but you should be able to find it up there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so with respect to our NAM pipeline, the first item here is just the continuation of the work with ICAP, CPA Canada, and IFAC. So post-February event, we've contributed some content for the IFAC Knowledge Gateway in the form of an event and key issues summary. A recording of that event is still available on the IFAC Knowledge Gateway as well. CPA Canada is also taking the lead with its two partners on developing the series of 4 papers that are heavily informed by the event outputs, as well as some broader research and outreach. The working group, as well as some representation from the task force, are also involved in the authoring and or review of these non-authoritative guidance pieces. Each of the papers is related to subject areas that the working group is committed to working in. The first paper on complexity is content final, and actually just today we've seen the first the clean copy or the publishing copy of that. The second on ethical leadership with the focus on challenges and opportunities that are related to technology and ethical decision-making considerations has begun its peer review process. And then the final 2 papers have been outlined, one on the concerns around myths and disinformation. That's going to include highlighting objectivity, the importance of an inquiring mind and skepticism, as well as thoughts on identifying and mitigating bias. So obviously a very clear direction towards some of the elements in the code from the Role and Mindset project, kind of trying to shine a bit of a spotlight on those. And then finally, one on the importance of professional skills, values, attitudes, and ethics in an increasingly digitized world. That will tie back to fundamental principles like integrity, professional competence and due care, of course, and professional behavior. We've also been speaking with several other PAOs and NSSs about jointly developing topic-specific guidance. The special shout out to the Australian IESBA and the Japanese Institute of CPAs, who we're very much looking forward to working with in the now relatively near future. An example of one of the topics is shown here on the slide, so the concept of routine or mechanical, and providing some illustrations in a technology context. So where technology can be used to automate tasks and some of the considerations that might be needed where there are elements of professional judgment that are built into some of these systems or applications. And then carrying on, there's also a plan to draft a couple of more installments of that popular and well-received joint IESBA-IFAC product, the Exploring the IESBA Code series, that will highlight key aspects of technology-related considerations when applying the code. And the link is here on the slide to the existing 12 installments. And then lastly, in the work that's happening now, IESBA staff is preparing a report to summarize and highlight the feedback that was received from the task force's technology survey responses from the end of last year. And then I should also mention there's a few additional topics that we're still working on getting into the pipeline and finding collaborative partners for, or finding sufficient internal resources to develop. Those would be things like the impact of the revised NAS provisions on new and emerging services, and also examining the boundary between audit and business advisory services. And this is something that came up from an NSS about the desire to emphasize that the increasing interrogation of a company's data set by the auditor might lead to, or they've experienced that it's led to an increased risk of providing business insights that go beyond what might typically be included in a management letter from the auditor, and instead more reach into that realm of business advisory services. So that's something for us to explore a little further. Of course, for anything to do with NAS, we also need to work with, in particular, the NAS and fees rollout working group in helping with technology-related messaging there, and so that we're not crossing wires. And clearly with the task force, if there's areas that they're working on in terms of code changes, because we're not looking to preempt or change or add to or what have you in anything to do with the code or things that might be coming to the code in terms of consideration. Kim mentioned yesterday there's NAS videos that are available already as part of that rollout work, and also we footnoted that in our cover note that one of the NAS videos is technology specific, which is great. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then, of course, the other part of the working group's mandate is fact-finding activities, and our work continues on that front as well. We're gathering information through various desk research and focused outreach. We're still keeping an eye on AI and data analytics, but we're also scanning the other areas of interest that are on the slide here. And as you know, based on the presentations from the external experts that have been arranged, we're currently having a bit of an increased focus on blockchain as what we're looking at. So not just broadly always looking at things, but clearly we need to be also focused on individual areas and thinking about how there might be code interactions. So a good example, I guess, of a potential gap to be evaluated to see if it warrants further consideration was something that was provided yesterday when Professors Bakarich and Castengay noted potential independence issues that can arise if, for example, the auditor is given full read-write access to a client's blockchain as opposed to being able to just view transactions. So it's issues like that that obviously come to our attention, and then that as a working group we need to be thinking about more strongly in the very specific context of what's in the code and not just potential ethics issues that might arise sort of for more broad business ethics types of issues. Going forward, we're also watching for relevant events to attend or participate in, including tech-related conferences or symposia that will help to deepen our team's familiarity with these emerging issues, and in particular how certain of these technologies are currently being implemented or how they're sort of sought to be implemented, which is our only or closest method of having a crystal ball, if you will, is to try to anticipate as best as anyone else can, I guess, what might be coming down the pipe in terms of implementation of technologies like this in the profession. And then next slide. So both our fact-finding and NAM coordination work build off focused research, and we have a lot of exciting activities that are either on the go now or on the horizon here as well. When it comes to outreach, what we're really mindful of is the benefits of diversity of thought and perspective. There's obviously varying levels of technical expertise, but then also how these technologies are being used in different geographies and through different roles that professional accountants play within organizations. So it's important to get a handle on all of those different aspects and not kind of end up with blinders on and only receive meetings from those groups that really are interested in talking to us. We're being proactive about reaching out to groups that perhaps we don't normally hear from as much, and that's something that we want to continue. So in terms of diversity, I mean, really, again, it's geographic, it's cultural, it's background, it's expertise, it's PAIB versus PAPP, it's corporate and those charged with governance, it's tech players and other professions. And so far, we're finding good opportunities and connections. It seems that pretty much anyone you want to talk to is interested in talking about this subject and is also actively addressing very similar sorts of issues and concerns and has similar questions to we do. Not always answers, and neither do we, quite frankly, but definitely it's important to have those discussions so we can move toward answers collectively. So as I previously mentioned, the first two items in the blue box here, key outreach activities, those have already been talked about, so I won't get into those anymore. The working group, jointly with the Tech Task Force, also met with the Committee of European Auditing Oversight Bodies, their International Auditing Standards subgroup. We gave them an update on the tech work streams and received their comments, primarily their comments related to specific code issues and independence issues, as you might imagine. Next, at the NSS meeting last month, we received a number of good feedback items, one of which included a great suggestion, and was happy to receive this as a proactive suggestion from two national standard setters about the idea of forming a joint IESBA technology working group and NSS advisory group that could help to develop and issue NAM and really just to talk about some of these issues that are going on in a collective space rather than just having one-on-one outreach sessions with different groups. And we thought that was extremely positive. Since that time, we've had some internal discussions about this idea and the potential to broaden the technology stakeholder involvement in that kind of an advisory group to perhaps be more of an experts advisory group that would include, but not strictly be limited to NSSs, because again, there are other organizations and even professions that we've been liaising with, and that we also believe that there's merit in including in those discussions, as well as some practical academics who might be willing to share their expertise. So we're trying to sort of figure out what the structure of that might be like and what the logistics around it are, because obviously it's not insignificant with respect to resources as well to put that kind of group together and to do it in a meaningful way. So we're actively pursuing it, again, given that these technologies are complicated, and we really need to be able to tap into the expertise of those who deal with these emerging issues on a regular basis. A quick note also that we received a large amount of feedback and commentary through the Chinese Institute of CPAs from a diverse stakeholder group within China to the questions that we raised on our technology survey. So really want to thank Yao Shu for organizing and sort of spearheading that initiative. That was great. The themes that in the responses that we received were largely consistent with those from other groups. But that's okay. I mean, that's actually convenient, right, from our perspective. And what we've done is we've referred those on to the task force to really join the rest of the survey results as input for that group as well. In the up-and-coming category for Q3 and Q4, we've started some discussions with counterparts from the Saudi Organization for CPAs, with huge thanks to Dave Clark for that. And they're keen to help organize a regional tech ethics event later this year, which is excellent because that's, again, a geographic region that we're interested in receiving other perspectives from. And they're also looking at a stakeholder group. We're all collectively looking at a stakeholder group that goes beyond just accountants and auditors and into some of those, those charged with governance and that type of group. For additional outreach plans that aren't on the slide, there have been some initial discussions with and we have a longer discussion coming up with the Pan-African Federation of Accountants and a number of different stakeholders in South America, such as the Federal Councils for Accountants and for Auditors in Brazil, and also the Argentinian Association for Integrated Reporting, all with significant thanks to Vanya for helping us to get some of that lined up, which is going to be fantastic. To help us manage all these moving parts consistently, something that we mentioned in the cover note is that we've just finalized a TWG briefing paper that it'll be sort of used in two forms. In its short form for individual outreach partners, it's a sort of a primer to be shared with those organizations. And that document will include some contextual information about the TWG's ongoing work, as well as somewhere in the area of 6 to 10 questions to be used as discussion starters for a scheduled meeting, just so that they really have a sense of the background and a sense of the topic areas that we're particularly interested in talking about. We've put the elements of that already to use in those initial discussions with the Saudi organization, again with thanks to David, and it's helpful to bring structure and clarity to those discussions so we're all on the same page, so to speak. And then what we're sort of calling the long form of this briefing paper will include all of the same background information, but will include a much longer list of questions that the TWG is interested in, but that would be both overwhelming if it were sent to any given stakeholder and also not relevant because there's a lot of questions that only apply to certain stakeholder groups. But the intent of having that long form out and being made publicly available and for the board is really just around transparency about what we're up to, the types of questions and topics that we're interested in, and also in the event that a stakeholder that we've not connected with is interested in seeing what we're doing and finds it relevant, they can take a look at the complete document and then contact us for a discussion, again, if we've not been able to reach out to them directly, or for whatever reason we haven't thought of them. Finally, we're also continuing to follow up with a number of other stakeholders including Accountancy Europe, and with thanks there to Sandeep, who recently presented to their TechNet group and came back to us with a few ideas for the working group to consider. Always useful to get guidance from different groups and different points of view. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to switch gears a little bit now and briefly look at blockchain. Blockchain is a heavy part of our agenda, but based on scheduling availability, we had that first blockchain presentation yesterday, so you've already heard some interesting and important insights in this area in terms of some of the relevant opportunities and challenges from this technology. And Katie and John's presentation really highlighted some of the open questions around cryptocurrencies with respect to valuation and classification as an intangible asset, and with respect to some security threats from hacking and simply from loss of one's private key, which obviously would have pretty material implications for some organizations were that to happen. But as John said, all cryptocurrencies run on blockchains, but blockchains have many other applications as well. So at the working group, we've also been considering some of the other business use cases of blockchain, so things like smart contracts and using blockchains to verify authenticity of origin for products and services. And we're particularly interested in, of course, those use cases where audit firms are offering services relying on blockchains. And one of the issues that we're trying to get a better handle on is one that the presenters also raised yesterday, and that's given that all of the players on a blockchain are connected, then what happens if an audit firm sets up a blockchain application for a client? There might be obvious independence issues with respect to that particular client if they're also an audit client, but how far does that concern reach? So could the audit firm or could the firm audit another company that relies on the same blockchain? And so as blockchains become more pervasive, those questions are becoming both more important and also more urgent for us to consider as well, sort of before the horse is completely out of the barn. I mean, the technology is certainly in broad use already. We're also watching the evolving regulatory landscape in this area to see where other stakeholders might be going, what their thinking is. And of course, we're more broadly considering the questions around sustainability and the massive levels of energy resources that are being used to support blockchains, especially cryptocurrencies. Obviously, with the increasing global focus on sustainability and resource stewardship, and some of the expectations around professional accountants that the public has in this regard, cryptocurrencies and their reliance on dirty energy sources run somewhat contrary to the public interest. And so what's our role in that, and sort of what's the ethical lens that needs to apply to questions of that sort? Okay, and so with that, that's it for my update. I wonder if we can skip to, because of the scheduling, the slide deck that you have is a bit out of order at this point. But if we could skip to slide 13, and I will pause here, and I mean, the next steps are obviously we will continue to do this work and provide a further update as to what's been going on in September. But just looking for any feedback, comments, suggestions, and so on at this point before we move into the external presentations.
Thank you very much, Brian. See if anyone has a comment or a question. Please raise your hand, the Zoom hand. Jeff, can you see anyone?
I don't see anyone yet, but if you have trouble finding your raised hands, you can also raise your physical hands, and we'll try to spot them, of course. We have a comment from Junpei.
Junpei, thank you. Junpei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much presentation of Brian. As Brian mentioned in the presentation, currently professional accountants utilize new technology in their practices. I believe that it might be good to have a NAM or guidance on specific topics. For example, judgment supported by artificial intelligence, data sharing with the client by cloud server, etc. I think such norm or guidance will be very helpful in audit practices. That's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Junpei. We also have a comment from Caroline.
Caroline.
Brian, thanks for the presentation. Just on blockchain and the impact on independence that Katie mentioned. So the firms have considered and have quite extensive guidance on that in terms of, you've developed something for a client, but that a platform is being used by multiple parties. So happy to share or put you in contact with the people from my firm who have been looking at this and the guidance that they've developed. Also around the origins, how blockchain is being used to trace, food and products all the way back to the source. Happy to connect you with people in my firm as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for the offer. Do I see any?
There are no other raised hands at this stage, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, back to you, Brian. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Stavros, and thanks, Junpei, for the additional NAM topic. That's useful and one that's interesting for sure. And also, Caroline, thanks for the offer to connect, and we will certainly be taking you up on that, because whatever guidance is already out there and sort of in use would be something that we'd like to look at and consider. So thanks for that. Jeff, can I ask if our next two presenters are available?
I think I've seen Dr. Ramamurthy.
Yes,
And
they have
Eric
both
Kohn is
joined
here
us,
as well.
Brian. Yes.
Perfect. So if those two gentlemen are ready to go, or will be ready to go in a moment. Thanks, Diana. Okay. Perfect. Yep, here we go. Okay, so what I'd like to do now then is introduce the speakers for our next information and education session. So continuing on with our blockchain theme this meeting, but now with consideration of internal control insights and perspectives. Sri Ramamurthy is a University of Dayton accounting professor, but he considers himself a reflective practitioner. I'll let him explain what that is. Previously, he was on the US PCAOB Standing Advisory Group, and he'll be joining the FEI National Board in July. Sri is also a co-author of the COSO Blockchain and Internal Control Research paper, and today he's excited to present with his collaborator, Eric Cohen, who is a co-founder of XBRL, and whose technical interests include areas like audit data standards and data level assurance, continuous audit, and distributed ledgers. I've had the pleasure of meeting Eric a couple of years ago now, as we both presented at a University of Waterloo Ethics and Technology Symposium. So great to see you again, Eric, and welcome to you both. So with that, let me slide the virtual floor your way to carry on.
So thank you,
All
Brian.
right.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks, Eric, for putting up the slides here. As Brian wanted me to explain, well, what I meant by the reflective practitioner comment is that I have been with Anderson Worldwide, with Ernst & Young, and Grant Thornton, as well as a software consulting firm called Infogix. So I have been in practice for quite a number of years, and that's what makes me a reflective practitioner. Let me fix the... Okay. So the way this project started was in 2018. I was in San Francisco with Eric being a technical presenter at the AAA Blockchain Symposium, which was co-sponsored by the Accounting Blockchain Coalition and very well received. And that's where it struck me that, having the kind of talent that Eric represents in terms of his deep knowledge, technical knowledge in this area, why not think about exploring what blockchain-enabled environments can do with respect to internal controls. So
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Ramurjay. I'm wondering if you can just speak a bit closer to your mic or turn up your volume a little bit. Is that okay?
Okay, let me see. Is that better? No?
Yes.
Is that a little better?
Not maybe just a tad more. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here.
We can no longer hear Sri. Well, while we're waiting for Sri, why don't I pick up in his place, and then we'll have him join us already in progress. In our 20 minutes, this is what we're going to be doing. Sri, if he's back with us, we'll start off with some introductory comments. We will then dig into the 2020 COSO Blockchain Internal Controls research paper. We'll give a little bit of a background of it and some of the key insights. In the briefing paper that you have, we distributed, we gave you some detail about the implications for ethics and organizational culture that were called out in the paper. But again, Sri will also summarize those as he comes back and joins us. We'll then move to some issues that during the process of putting together that paper, we came into. The COSO research paper was focused on internal controls over financial reporting. And we also had a number of thoughts more broadly that we wanted to share. We'll have some concluding remarks, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Sri, are you back with us?
He isn't.
Okay. So let me just keep on going then. Sri wanted to really focus on this. We will be talking about it in a lot more detail. But we included in the briefing document and the executive summary of the research paper, and a lot more detail in the appendix of that paper. This slide will hit at the end, but wanted to emphasize that, as I guess you heard yesterday, blockchain isn't just tomorrow's challenge. It's already bringing change. And with that change happening, as we've noted, blockchain is already something that the profession has found itself reacting to rather than acting upon. I know in your presentation yesterday, you heard about some uses from practitioners and others. Just making sure that you did see this one, where there's already a really trailblazing CPA firm out of California, and they're delivering real-time attestation level reports. They started with attestation based on the former AT 101. It's now agreed upon procedure reports, which are created and signed by computers with no human intervention. They access certain information on blockchains, they compare it with information automatically from third-party sources, and then they report on whether there's sufficient support for the amounts that are reported in the public, transparent, real-time blockchain data. The CPA solution also serves to provide comfort for systems that are automatically going to rely on the balance checks using decentralized applications and the smart contracts that Brian mentioned. So on your scene, you see that the CPA, in conjunction with the client, is providing this data. We've got this much out there, 6,368. We have checked the system, 6368 is the support. 6346 is what we have out there, so there's sufficient support for what we're working with. Someone can go and say, I would like right now an independent accountant's report that is this proof and is associated with this. And up will come in this report an agreed upon procedure engagement, time-stamped PDF form that has the results, the criteria, and a real-time signed agreed upon procedure report, all on demand, no people involved.
Thank you.
And Eric, I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay, Sri, great.
Again, thank you for carrying the ball and waiting for me until I got my voice back. Okay, so Let me carry on with this slide. So one of the most important things with you as human beings is environmental scanning. And what I mean by that is tracking change. Tracking change is one of the most important things that we do because even in the brain, that is what is called the stability plasticity dilemma, which helps us maintain continuity with change. And so this making sense of the world cannot be better captured than by Martek's law. And what Martek's law says is that technology advances exponentially while organizations change only logarithmically, which leaves standard setters in a forever state of playing catch up. Here is a visual representation of Martek's law. You can see how the curve showing how technology changes exponentially is literally on a very steep upward sloping curve, whereas the fact that organizations change only logarithmically leaves a big gap, and this challenge grows harder with time. I can tell you some research recently has shown that in the context of COVID, it seems there was a bump in terms of how organizations did try to catch up a little faster than previously. But bottom line, this is something we'll experience with both blockchain as well as with emerging technologies. Along the way, we also have to consider automation as well as other biases. Automation bias is called out in the IESBA Exploring the Code installment number 1, Focus on Bias. Basically, it says that we have a tendency to over-rely on automation, and that may not be to our benefit because increased efficiency does not imply increased effectiveness. And the final point I want to make is that, as Bill Donaldson, the former SEC chairman, said, internal controls are the very DNA of the organization. So whenever internal controls are compromised, you have all kinds of issues, error, fraud, maybe even bankruptcy and the death of the corporation. So the control environment is critically important. And that's why our team was focused on looking at what kind of effect is a blockchain-enabled control environment have on the control environment in general, and vice versa, because this is a reciprocal causation going on here. Blockchain would affect the control environment, and the control environment components will, in effect, have an influence on blockchain and how it's integrated. So the other components of internal control, which I'll be talking about later, are risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. And as I said, these are all parts of the COSO internal control integrated framework, which I'll talk about later. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the paper, which was, I believe, shared with the group. And this is the paper on which Eric and I are co-authors, along with 2 Deloitte partners. And as I was saying, when I guess I suddenly cut out, my apologies for that. It was in 2018 that I started thinking about this, and we reached out to COSO, and COSO was interested in having a thought piece like this. And then, with the help of Deloitte, we also got into the details of, how would this paper look like. We had to cover blockchain. We obviously had to cover internal control, the integrated framework from COSO, originally issued in 1992, updated in 2013. And then how do we marry the two and show what are the points of intersection and what does that mean? How would that intersection, on the one hand, enhance the control environment, to perhaps create new risks and threats because of the introduction of blockchain, and finally, what do we do about mitigation? And so that's what we did. We have a few appendices. The first appendix is a technical appendix or a glossary. The second one is about the 10 things that Eric just showed all of us. And the final one was about financial reporting, assertions, and audit evidence. And, again, the influence of blockchain on all this. Next slide. So this is the famous COSO cube. And I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with this. COSO is, of course, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Consists of the American Accounting Association, the AICPA, the IIA, FEI, and IMA. Those are the 5 organizations, behind it. And they came out with internal control integrated framework in 1992, and as I said, updated in 2013. So this COSO cube, which has been with us for a couple of decades now, is showing in a cross-sectional way across operations, reporting, and compliance. We look at the 5 internal control components of control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. And since this is an ethics-related group, perhaps I should point out that a useful mnemonic to remember these 5 components is actually the word crime. And that will give you, the 5 internal control components I just said, just easy memory. Now, we also look at specific applications at an entity level, or, whether it's a division or an operating unit or even a function. So, this is a robust framework that cuts across, all kinds of considerations. And the control environment, which is going to be, Eric and my focus today because of the ethics kind of angle, that has 5 principles out of the 17 principles in total that are in the framework. It is a principle-based framework. So the 5 top ones, which come under control environment, are demonstrates commitment to integrity and ethical values, exercises oversight, responsibility, establishes structure, authority, and responsibility, demonstrates commitment to competence, and enforces accountability. Clearly, very, very close to ideas around ethics. There are other control components. I won't go into that right now, but I can tell you the information communication obviously, matters. Monitoring clearly matters. And, how can we forget risk assessment? So really, all 5 of these are interlinked and they're all relevant. But, we'll focus on control environment because, for this presentation, the ethics component is squarely, in that sort of box, so to speak. So expanding on the control environment, which as I just read out, the top 5 principles are noted there, because ethics and organizational culture are part of this component, we want to take a very careful look on what kind of enhancements are possible. Now, one of the things is, because the control environment clearly is dealing with tone from the top and things like that, we are talking about human involvement. And, when you're talking about leadership, when you're talking about, inspiration, motivation, trust, communication, all that, which is part of the control environment, but is a very human thing, one might at first blush wonder, what can blockchain do? Probably not much. Well, you would actually be mistaken because it can definitely supplement a lot of these things and sometimes improve matters quite substantially. So let's take the first example under enhancements. Many times human beings can be the problem in terms of, transactional integrity, especially when you're thinking of hanky-panky of any kind. Whereas when you remove management from manual intervention, you are really denying them the possibility to engage in management override of internal controls. So there you go. So blockchain actually would allow an environment in which that kind of undesirable involvement is taken care of. So that's one example of an enhancement. In terms of new threats, well, permissionless blockchains, sort of the public, blockchain may be used for unethical exploits and sometimes, you have a certain level of pseudonymity with blockchain that may embolden people to engage in behavior that you may not otherwise engage in. So yeah, clearly, I think the introduction of blockchain does introduce new sorts of risks that we need to pay attention to. And in terms of the mitigation, well, one good example is when you have a consortium blockchain, whereas individuals or groups that are banded together, and if you don't have good accountability mechanisms and you don't have proper protocols for handling disputes, you could be in trouble. And so that is a governance and an accountability thing that needs to be considered and thought through carefully in those kinds of arrangements. I think Eric will talk more about how in an international context, that can really become a serious matter. So just want to say there's a reciprocal relationship, as I noted before, between blockchain and internal control and vice versa. So this is something in the briefing paper that we provided as a pre-reading, and we included explicit and specific references to the control environment component of internal control, and you'll find words and phrases like ethical values, human behavior, management decisions, integrity and ethics, perceived and actual ethical practices, and always, keeping ethical issues top of mind. And I've just noted the possibility of unethical exploits, which gets exacerbated in the context of a permissionless blockchain. So clearly, ethics is front and center in the control environment component.
So I will try and go a little quickly because I know we're running behind time. As I mentioned, we began to analyze this in a number of ways. What is just about blockchain and blockchain technology? What about blockchain plus AI, blockchain plus IoT? And we also considered where we and others think that it'll have a real impact on implementations, as well as the broad changes it can enable. As Sri just mentioned, blockchain, which has been adopted in those consortium blockchains, that's blurring the lines between enterprises. And that can strongly impact the risks, the controls, the ethics, and the corporate cultures in the disparate enterprises that it's now binding together. As mentioned in the research paper, issues such as management control come into a real new light when management override can have that more global context.
So I just want to be very quick about this. Just want to say that there is another framework that COSO has. It's the ERM framework, Enterprise Risk Management. And in many ways, it's broader, more substantive because it subsumes the 2013 framework. It also considers strategy. And so it's really integrating strategy and performance for the enterprise. So given that, I think a good project would be to look at, blockchain in the context of risk. And that risk is very well articulated in the ERM framework.
So thinking beyond the framework, the 2013 framework, we determined there are many additional issues that the profession needs to consider, from the basics of the technical issues inherent to blockchain, to its applications, to the potential changes in institutions and in society. One of the primary challenges is that an awful lot of the information you see on the web, in articles, even from the best sources, it is either oversimplified or it is simply wrong. Issues about privacy, accuracy beyond simple balances, security, and who owns or controls or has access to what in the environment. The capabilities such as suitability for accounting, with things such as the so-called triple entry accounting, are often oversimplified. And people speak about how blockchain is the perfect audit trail, inherently self-auditing, but a simple illustration of information that can be found in Bitcoin and related blockchains is found in the upper right of this slide from a website called Cryptograffiti that shows the inherent and validatable audit trail is not as pure and reliable as most people note. But on the next slide, we're going to dig into a bit into the information found in the technical appendix that we provided in our pre-briefing information. So Brian had mentioned the term smart contracts, and tokenization are two things in particular that have been called out as groundbreaking technologies that can impact and revolutionize accounting and audit. I personally have been assessing how each of these items can be examined using the IESBA framework as a lens. For example, if you think about decentralization and the related impact of the blurring of enterprise and national borders, it may prove to be a big challenge to the principle of professional behavior, which requires a professional accountant to comply with relevant laws and regulations. Also facilitated by blockchain, there are organizations that offer solutions that will change the very nature of the relationship between an enterprise, the auditor, the investor whose value is at stake, and the public, including how auditors are engaged and paid.
So I wanted to then bring us back to the idea of going beyond blockchain and looking at the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence can do a better job than refer to this book by Hannah Fry, How to Be Human in an Age of Machines. That's what we are really talking about here. And I'm going to indicate with help of this picture, we have circles here. So if we come from the outer circle where we are only dealing with manual only, so human activities, I think the IESBA framework does a very fine job of relating to how human beings might be held accountable with respect to key metrics, of behavior that are relevant to the profession. But now we are in a world where people use technology and professionals use technology into very high art form, actually, and it's only growing even more sophisticated and complex. So we are talking here about human beings supplemented, or accountant auditors being supplemented with technology. So one of the first things we have to think about is what happens when something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, we have to think about how is maybe the culpability to be determined. Could it be that it was the involvement of the machine that caused the error? After all, we have a Farmer's Almanac statement: to err is human, but to really foul up things, you need a computer. So there you go. We can think of the computer as being responsible for this. Now, the blockchain plus that Eric referred to earlier, which is an expansive consideration of, artificial intelligence, IoT, RPA, virtual reality, all kinds of things that are coming at us, that would bring us to a world where it'll be people led by technology. It's not just being supplemented. It is the people who are being, brought along. It is the technology in the lead here. So if something goes wrong in those instances, we have an even more serious problem, which could be an ethical issue. And finally, of course, when human beings get completely supplanted and we have autonomous technologies or systems, a simple example, in case you're wondering, is in almost every large city nowadays, traffic systems are autonomous systems. There is no human operator changing the lights from red to amber to green. No, it's all happening automatically. So under those kind of circumstances, when you have completely autonomous, behavior through machines, how do we even discuss ethical issues, particularly when things go wrong? And how does society grapple with what is the level of acceptable risk in these kind of situations? So those are the questions I'd like for us to, consider. These are just some observations that I like to make. You cannot effectively manage, account for, or audit what you don't understand, and which is what Blockchain Plus accelerates. There's something called Ashby's Law, talking about how the systems that are being regulated need to have a regulator that compounds within itself at least the complexity that's found in the environment that is sought to be regulated. So basically, the client environment matters, the accountant's competence matters, and you cannot audit any better than the client's environment will allow. That's really the takeaway there. Now, blockchain and other emerging technologies, in my mind, and I think Eric would agree with this, pose a competency threat for the profession. So we really do need to upskill. we need to get large numbers of professional accountants to not only embrace the technology, but become competent in its use and its applications. And clearly, Brian mentioned this in his comments about PAIBs and PIPPs. They are all sources of potential risk, whether they are within the organization, within the client's environment, or in their individual capacity. So those are some additional observations to consider.
So I know we've stretched our time. We've referenced this 10 things to know about blockchain in the briefing and research. We do think that they're very helpful. Calling out just a few quickly that might resonate. Number 5, blockchain is, in most people's mind, a technology, but much more it is about governance. It's about policy. It is about ethics, and other issues are really important. Number 6, people say that blockchain will make accountants and auditors obsolete. I talked to someone today, quite convinced about that, and I have written extensively on this topic. I am personally working to help to get accountants ready for blockchain and blockchain ready for accountants. Number 7, blockchain is a catalyst to many potential changes that are going to require entirely new disciplines, new relationships between organizations. Enterprise culture can take on an entirely new meaning in a trans-enterprise world. And finally, number 8, we encourage all who are involved in the profession and around to dialogue, educate, elevate, and engage the stakeholder community. This has to be the time. We've got to work together. Technical people, policy people, change management people, and everyone. Again, thank you for your patience. We hope our time will help in supplementing the important work that's reflected in the Phase 1 report and the existing draft materials that this group has already put out. Technical change is having a real impact on ethical and corporate culture. Blockchain and blockchain in conjunction with other technologies will and has already started to be the foundation for new ways of doing business, integrating systems, and making, both in the figurative and literal sense, money. And we need to consider the potential scenarios that are based on the broad possibilities to anticipate how life and the application of ethics may change as the world of business and accounting becomes enmeshed with this new facilitator of doing things. Sri, what is a design thinking mindset?
So the design thinking mindset is basically best illustrated, and I know we're out of time here. I just want to say 2 comments. One, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So you want to be future oriented in your thinking. And famous comment by Ilya Prigogine, sometimes, that's attributed to Dennis Gabor, that the future cannot be predicted perhaps, but futures can be invented. So, design thinking is about how do we design a future that firmly remains in our control, rather than keeping it as a runaway thing and we suddenly lose control and we don't know what to do. We're helpless.
So with whatever time, Brian, we hand it back to you. We're glad to answer any questions now or in the future.
Any questions from the board, please raise hand. I have a raised hand from Vanya.
Vanya?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Professors Sri and Eric, for the brilliant presentation. I was just wondering, I love the graphic that you showed about the velocity of technology advancement against market. And I was wondering if it was not a result of somewhat a result of difficult generation, because technology is so complex and sophisticated that the old people who learn how to do business in such a way do not have the time or the expectation of or learning the new technology, as it will not be the same tomorrow again. So maybe it's just a gap of generation, and we need the new generation to took our place in order to provoke the changes, somewhat through education, somewhat through regulation. how to give incentive for those who are already in the market to realize that they should follow technology advancement? How to do that?
Well, that's a very, very astute observation, Vanya, because there's this phrase which is very effective in confirming what you just said, which is growing up digital. And I study boards of directors, and I've noted the average age of a U.S. corporate board member is 61. And what does that tell you? They probably did not grow up digital. And they are obviously going to have a very hard time adapting, to any new technologies. And so, to your point, though, I think we need to tell the younger generation that the future is indeed looking very different, where technology is going to be not only pervasive, but pretty much the enabler and the driver of anything that they want to accomplish that's meaningful. And that they need to be in the driver's seat if they are going to take handle of that kind of technological change and control over the environment. And the prior generation simply does not know enough to do that. And they find it very hard even to imagine that. So your point is well taken.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any other comment or questions. Sri, Narek?
I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, let me add my thanks then to Sri and Eric for a great presentation. I'm over 61, but I'm starting to understand with your leadership. Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Brian.
Caroline, did you have a comment? I just saw you raised hand momentarily. No?
Oh, Caroline.
No, I just wanted to express my thanks. So it was a clap, Chair.
Oh, I beg your pardon. It was too similar to me. Okay, sorry. Back to you, Brian.
Brian, we can't hear you. Brian, you're on mute.
Don't think I'm on. Something going on?
You're good now.
Can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll move on our agenda here, and we'll be looking at an update from the IEESB. So as everyone's aware, our working group coordinates our activities with the IEESB's technology working group as well through correspondent member Joanna Field. In addition, last month, Cam Leung and Greg Driscoll, who is the task force's correspondent member to the IEESB's TWG, briefed members of that working group on the IESBA's various technology work streams and activities that we have on the go. And at this point, I'd like to pass over briefly to Greg, who's going to provide us with a summary of some of the points that were raised during that joint session with the IEESB TWG.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me okay, I hope? Thank you, Brian, for that. Yes, as Brian said, Cam, Deanne, and I provided an update on IESBA's technology project to the IEESB Technology Working Group on the 26th of May. And what we covered in that presentation was the updated multiple workstream pathway, the split and delineation of work between the technology task force now and the technology working group. So talking about the split and then covering the activities of each of the groups on the task force side, focusing on the direction of the task force in addressing the 7 recommendations from the project's phase 1 report. And then on the technology working group side, talking about the potential NAM topics in the areas of further research being pursued by the working group. So great dialogue. Coming off of that presentation, we talked about a number of things that was of interest to the IEESB Technology Working Group. We talked about the challenge of working a pervasive concept like technology into a principles-based code. where, structurally do you insert technology in a separate section? How do you spread it throughout all of the various sections of the code? So that was a good discussion. We talked about the revisions to part 2 of the code relating to PAIBs that the technology task force was considering coming out of the phase 1 report recommendations. We talked about the concept of growth mindset and the task force's intention with the incorporation of growth mindset either into the code or as part of non-authoritative material. And then lastly, we covered whether the IEESB is considering modernizing some of its terms in its code to update for technological change, similar to what the IESBA technology task force is considering. So I think all great dialogue. I think it was a productive update, bringing them up to speed as to where we are on the IESBA project. So with that, I'll stop and see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Greg.
Perfect, thank you.
Are there any questions, please? Any comment on what Greg presented? See any?
I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So thank you very much, Greg. Thank you.
So thanks, Greg. Stavros, shall I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Great. One thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention at the end of the last session is the speakers, Eric and Sri, referred to some pre-reading materials. Those materials were actually shared just a couple of days ago with the task force and working group members at this point. If there's any board members who are interested in receiving a copy of those materials, please just get in contact with Cam Leung, and happy to send those along as well. So just so people are aware of that. Okay. So yeah, thanks, Greg. Next and last then for the technology working group, part of the agenda anyway, I'd like to introduce Brett James, the Deputy Director of the IEESB, who's going to be providing us with a bit more detail on the IEESB's technology working group, their strategic activities, where tech fits into the actions in their work plan, as well as also highlighting some of the tech resources, tech ethics resources, I guess, that are available on their site also. So, Mr. James, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thank you also for the warm welcome to your board. It's been a couple of years since I've been here. I remember speaking to you about professional skepticism some years ago and definitions of component auditors, so it's good to be on the technology train now. I just wanted to say thanks particularly to Greg and Diane and Cam for their excellent work and being great partners with us as we study technology. It is certainly an interesting topic that I think we're all trying to get our arms around and rapidly working out just how quickly evolving this space is, but also the importance of taking action and making that action clear and consistent rather than just a sort of one-off effort. So if you wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. What I'm going to cover through is just a bit of a brief walkthrough of how we've done this in our strategy and then sort of how our strategy is being operationalized. Our strategy includes a number of strategic drivers, one of which is advancement in the use of technology. In terms of our strategic objectives, 2 of our 3 strategic objectives specifically call out technology as being a main source of what we're going to do to action those objectives. One of those is really thinking about how technology is impacting our standards, and the second one is innovating how we work as a standard setter. How do people digest our standards? What can we do with technology in that space? Next slide, please. We've got essentially a 2-pronged approach to technology in terms of our work. So the first one, and the one that you'll probably be most familiar with, is our technology working group. This originally started as what we call the data analytics working group some years ago, and it had a life. It issued an excellent report and then a feedback statement on the report. So it started off very much with a data analytics mindset, but it very quickly evolved into a broader technology project. And that was largely because as we started to get into this, we started to realize that the data analytics piece wasn't really giving us enough of a broad approach to technology. It was a bit too narrow for us, and that we really needed to broaden things out. So we renamed it the Technology Working Group, and immediately, of course, tried to then live up to that mandate. And the most immediate thing we needed to do was to get some non-authoritative guidance in the hand of auditors. And if I can just give you an example of the kinds of questions we were getting asked, it was, can I use technology to do a procedure? And from our point of view, it was like, there is absolutely nothing in our standards that would prevent it. But the comment we were getting back was that whilst there's nothing in the standard that would prevent it, there's also nothing in the standard that says you can. And so if people were approaching with a very risk-averse mindset, but perhaps erring on the side of caution and staying away from using technology, or at least they were perhaps doing a little bit of a Texas two-step where they were using the technology, but then repeating the entire exercise manually, so that, you know, if a regulator or an audit inspector came in, they would have something to point to. That's obviously perfectly acceptable, but then of course you've got to ask the question of, is there something we're missing? Is that really the right answer? So we went down this path of writing some non-authoritative guidance, and the 4 topics are listed on the left there. Performing audit procedures, identifying and assessing risks of material misstatement. That was issued in conjunction with ISO 315 revised 2019. We talked a little bit about audit documentation considerations. And if I could just say, if I was to summarize those 3 documents in a couple of words, the message we were really trying to send was that the same considerations you apply to a manual procedure will also apply to that same procedure being done using an automated tool or technique. You've still got to apply your mind. You can't rely on the technology to do it for you. You've got to still bring yourself as a professional, competent, and experienced auditor to the table when you're performing those procedures. The very top one in that list was actually the most recent one we issued, which is over-reliance. And we decided to write this paper very much to try to address a little bit of a concern that we had, that in some cases the technology was moving sufficiently quickly that we started to get a bit concerned that auditors may be inappropriately relying on it. So to give an example, we saw demonstrations of software that's amazing. You know, you could feed it the company GL and some basic information about the company, and it would start spitting out a risk assessment for you. And so we started to think, well, hang on a second, you know, I'm sure all the really experienced auditors in the room would know how bad an idea that is, to just take that risk assessment and run with it. And so, of course, it's a great tool to have, but it shouldn't be over-relied on. So that paper very much is trying to do that. And we identify in there that over-reliance can be caused by a whole bunch of things. But if I can just give you an example of something specific that we called out in there, it was you didn't actually understand what the technology was doing, but you were happy to take the result from the technology. And that's a real concern that we were very worried about. So we've reinforced that in a couple of places, not just here, but also in our recently revised quality control standards also talk a little bit about that particular challenge. If I just move on to that middle box about what we're doing currently, we've got 2 more pieces of non-authoritative guidance that we're working on. One's dealing with a performance materiality question when you're dealing with automated tools and techniques. I won't bore you with it. It's a bit of a technical topic. The other one is just dealing with how technology can impact your planning processes when you're planning an audit. The other points in there that I'll just mention very briefly in passing, we are thinking about technology in all our projects. So you'll see it particularly in our audit evidence standard. We are trying to bake in a lot more technology. It's in the project proposal that was one of the main objectives of that the revision of that standard, was to increase the awareness of and allowance for technology. And I'll talk in a little bit later about how we're doing that. We're also trying to very much connect in with our IESBA colleagues. Greg mentioned before the joint membership on each other's task forces, on each other's working groups. And again, with the task force, you know, we've already spoken with your staff about, you know, when the right time might be for us to, you know, collaborate a little bit further on that one as well. Just moving to the long-term focus, I will spend a couple of slides on this one. We have also been very interested in the topic of how do we as a standard setter make sure we're positioned well for a potential disruption in audit and assurance. So we've got some objectives listed there, but Diana, if you wouldn't mind just jumping to the next slide. What we tried to do with this project was really try to stretch our minds a little bit beyond the usual people that we talk to. So what we did was we actually connected in with the active disruptors. So essentially that was involved in talking to innovators, startups, CEOs of small but very active technology companies. So we talked to people who are involved in, all sorts of technology, some of which sounds a little bit science fiction-y, but we're really trying to test the boundaries of what's actually possible for audit, but also what's coming down the chain that may be like 5 or 10 years away, but potentially has the ability to completely transform audit. This slide goes into a little bit of detail about our process. Just in view of the time, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I'm more than happy to take questions if you're interested. If I just circle to the end of that slide though, we presented the findings from all our research and our roundtables to the board, and we really got 2 messages back. Number 1, strong support for the initiative. The board's very engaged in this one, and if anything, would probably like us to move a lot faster. And the second thing was, I guess, a bit of a caution that some of the timelines that we'd set out in our papers, they thought might have been a bit conservative, and that things could in fact move a bit faster than that. So Diana, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. So if you, this is probably the most single most illustrative example of the findings from our research. Essentially what this is doing is it's mapping different types of technology and it's putting them on a scale of how significantly they could transform audit and assurance, and also a possible timeline. Now, literally everything in this diagram you can argue with. You can argue about the timescales, you can argue about the significance, but for purposes of what we've got, you kind of get this sort of initial horizon, secondary horizon, and third horizon as you work from left to right. And some of the stuff on the right-hand side there is really quite, it's a little out there. You kind of have to suspend your disbelief when you're talking to some of the startups. But for example, one of the startups we talked at can produce essentially a simulated company. They can simulate the internal controls of the company. They can put in a sort of, it's called agent-based modeling. They put in like an electronic CFO, and then they can manipulate that CFO being a good person or a bad person or someone who's a bit lazy, and then see whether or not those things will be detected by the internal control system as transactions move through that simulation. So is that a bit out there? Absolutely. If I was an auditor and my client had that, would I be super enthusiastic about having a look at it? Yeah. So this is, a good example of some technology that we're just trying to keep tabs on and monitor. So next slide, please. So basically, the end result of all that work that we've done is we worked out that there's a little bit of an information value chain going on here, which is just that box on the left, accessing information, verifying and protecting it, and then lastly, but certainly not least, assessing internal controls. When we took all of that and all the technology into account, we came out with basically 4 major trends that we needed to monitor. The first one is that a trend of auditing becoming much more continuous in real time. That doesn't mean the assurance is being provided in a continuous and real time manner. It just means the auditor is obtaining the information in a much more continuous and real time manner. And we've seen some examples of that, for example, in open banking initiatives, where the auditor can see the client's banking records directly without having to get a confirmation. We've also seen a trend towards much more analytics-based audit and assurance, and I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anyone. We're just seeing that increasing. Much more remote audit and assurance. We did actually do most of the work on this before the pandemic started, but things might have moved just a little bit faster than we thought there. And the last one, but certainly very much not the least, a much more of a trend towards a technology-enabled profession. And what we're really getting at here is, if you think about the role of an engagement partner, how much AI knowledge does that engagement partner have to be able to understand what's being done on their engagement? It's not a small amount, it may not be a large amount, but there's something there. And so if you fast forward 10 years, if you fast forward 20 years, you've got to start asking yourself, what's the core skill set of that engagement partner? Is it accounting? Is it finance? How much of it is actually going to be IT? And we can probably all have a view on that one, but nevertheless, the point is that if you work it across an entire engagement team, you start realizing that the makeup of that engagement team in 2030 or 2040 could be very different to what it is today. So last on that slide is just the actions for us and others. I'll focus for the purpose of this presentation on what we're doing. Essentially breaks up into building, maintaining and sharing our knowledge, and then also considering our standard setting mandate. Next slide, please. So on the building, maintaining and sharing side, this is essentially where all our disruption parts sit. We're doing some work to build structures to house the knowledge that we've now got to make sure that we're keeping it up to date. We're making sure that we've got the ability to maintain that through staying actively and consistently engaged with both that startup community that are actively trying to disrupt the industry, but also to existing players, large audit firms, many of whom have innovation units sitting within the firm that are very active in this space. To do that, we're thinking about setting up an advisory group, particularly comprised of people that probably sit a little bit more on the disruptors side rather than the other side, but also to convene people together to facilitate interactions, influence, how we're choosing to approach these things, and last but certainly not least, to educate where we need to. And if I just give an example of something where we might be convening people, one of the big trends, one of the big technologies we noticed that might be quite helpful is actually called, it's data standardization. It's putting data into sufficiently rigorous buckets that you can be confident that what's inside the bucket is actually what it purports to be. So at the moment, auditors, for example, will get a download of data, and then they immediately have to spend, somewhere between a small and a large amount of time cleaning up the data before they can run an analytic on it. And so that time, as far as we're concerned, is a bit wasted. So data standardization has the potential to eliminate some of that data cleanup. So we're working actively with a couple of organizations about, what we can do to first educate practitioners about the existence of data standards, and then, of course, to, as much as we can, convene people together to start talking them. And much of this is beyond our mandate. We have no ability to mandate that entities use data standards, but we can, we can certainly talk to auditors about the importance of, if their client does use data standards, that's potentially a big improvement in audit efficiency. And one, of course, hopes that audit efficiency will translate into greater audit quality. On the standard setting side, this is where the technology working group part sits. I won't go through all of this in detail, but I'll just call out one or 2 points. The very first one, they're drafting assistance. We've been doing quite a bit of work on, at least at a staff level on the IESBA side, about dealing with having some more consistent drafting guidelines for our standards. And one of the things we thought we'd do on the technology side is bring in, we tend to get asked the same questions a lot, and it's something like, how do I write technology into this standard? Like, we know there's an issue, but how do we actually write it into the standard? And what we've come up with is a couple of general principles. Avoid specifying process, because the technology may obviate the need for the process. It may approach it from a very different direction. So focus instead on the principle or the outcome that you're looking for. And the second one, which we're still teasing out a little bit, is examples that are very specific to a certain technology tend to date the standard. And if you look through the ISAs, you will find a reference to facsimile machines, which now looks a little bit silly, but at the time was probably considered quite avant-garde. Look at how innovative we're being. But now we've got something sitting in our standard that I haven't even seen a fax machine in probably 10 years. So it's those kinds of things that we're just trying to embrace and communicate out to our task forces as a way of moving a little bit towards a consistent drafting approach. The other one I thought I just mentioned there is a technology working group for us is a great resource for projects that are underway. They're asking themselves technology questions. They just need to bounce it off someone. So that's one of the other functions that this working group performs. The very last thing I'll say just before I end is just around our own use of technology. We've been trying very much to innovate our own processes. So we brought in some, what's called qualitative data analysis software called Invivo, which I'm not sure to what extent you guys have been using it, but it helps us with the comment letter process, helps us bring those in with a nice, neat little audit trail sitting behind them. Equally in other areas, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this as well, a lot more around collaboration tools. We're trying to use the suite of Office 365 products and others to do a lot more collaboration than what we've been doing. I feel like this is a bit of an untapped area for us, but certainly we're hoping that this technology approach will start to uncover some new gems of technology that we can adopt internally. I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment. Maybe just to leave you with one parting message that we're always happy to collaborate with anyone from the ethics board. So please feel free to reach out at any time you need to. Dana, do you want to just move to the next slide? I think I just was going to pause here for any questions.
Any questions from the board? Please raise hands. I don't have any raised hands, Mr. Chairman. Oh, I have a comment from Ian.
Hi, Brett. Great to see you, and thanks for a really informative presentation. I just wanted to check with you, do you have a vision of how the auditing standards will change over the next decade in the light of your presentation today and the issues arising?
Thanks for the question, Ian. I'm not sure I do. We've got a lot of irons in the fire at the moment that touch on this. Whenever we've had discussions about it, that we still feel that the core of audit is not going to change. The fundamental principles that our standards are based on aren't going to change. What we're starting to get, I've got to be honest, is probably some questions around things like if the auditor takes into account the entire population of transactions, that's fundamentally a different exercise than the way that the audit has traditionally been set up. It produces some interesting questions around materiality. It produces some interesting questions around what you have to do with exceptions. So if you find an error, how much of that do you extrapolate? But you can't extrapolate if it's the whole population. Our standards have some certain obligations that sit on you if you're performing those sorts of procedures and you start finding issues. But again, if you're doing it on the whole population, it may produce a slightly different answer. So I guess maybe to come back to your question more directly, I'm not sure I do have a clear picture in my head of what the future holds. I guess what we're trying to do is keep very much an open mind and make sure we're staying close to with the topic so that we are ready to move if and when the profession is, when the tool becomes available that can really help us enhance audit quality.
Thank you.
We have a comment from Caroline.
Brett, thanks for your presentation. The question I have is around the audit engagement team going forward. I mean, you talked about, in future, the makeup of the team and the skill sets that they have might be quite different. And currently, when we describe the audit team, it's very much focused on accounting and auditing skills. How do you see that changing?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Caroline. If I can just maybe point you in a slightly different direction, when we did our work on quality management, ISQM 1, ISQM 2, ISO 220, in those standards, we actually broadened out what we meant by resources. So our old standards used to talk a lot about the engagement team itself, and then it was there and it did its job, but it didn't really talk about the other resources that have to be brought to bear to produce an effective engagement. So when we revised those standards, both ISQM 1 and ISO 220 now both have quite extensive discussion about resources. both the kinds of resources you need on the team, but also technological resources is another example. And on the technological resources side, we've acknowledged already in the standards the need for people who can actually understand and operate the technology. Now, you know, within that model, of course, there's people that you're going to have inside the audit team. There's going to be people that are, you know, external experts that, or the auditors experts that you're bringing into the team for the purposes of performing that one particular job. So there's a bunch of models that can be used to bring those people in. But I think in general, the makeup of the team, I think, will change as time goes on. That's my perception anyway. Whether or not how that is reconciled, whether it's through you know, changes in audit education or whether it's through just different hiring practices by firms, I don't know.
Thank you.
We have a comment from Vanya.
Thank you. And great to see you again, Brad. I miss you tremendously. And I found your presentation excellent. Thank you. It's very good to know what you've been doing at IESB task working group and compare with what we've been working on in IESBA as well. You mentioned the necessity of cleaning the data, and that's something that in technology worries me a lot, because we have so much useless data in the systems nowadays, and at the same time it is so difficult to clean it, because you have the risk of missing something important that is over there. So do you find any kind of solution for that in the near future? For example, if you go to search for a word in Google, you have 10,000 pages of answers for that. So I think that is a big difficulty in technological aspects in the future, because everyone puts everything in the cloud. And so I think that in the future, for us to clean the information that it's really needed to be working upon will be very difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Vanya, and good to see you as well. You know, it's a very challenging topic, I think, from a couple of angles. Number one, if you're the auditor and you attempt to run an analytic and the analytic doesn't produce an answer that you can use, I think this is where we start to ask ourselves some interesting question about what that tells you. So the one thing you can do is you can say, okay, well, the data in here that's incomplete or missing something that I needed in order to perform my test, I can put that into a separate bucket, and then I can rerun the test, get an answer. The problem that I have with that is, what do you do with the other bucket? Because you've now pulled out some transactions because for whatever reason they didn't meet the criteria. But isn't that a sign that I now need to do something with that other bucket? And it's, you know, and of course auditors are dealing with these things every day. It's not exactly a new topic. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, and I think this is where it kind of ties into that comment I made about data standardization. There are tools being developed. You know, this is a very well-known topic. If you talk to anyone particularly in financial services, you know, they're spending a lot of time and energy trying to make sure that their data is actually right for values of right. So that when they run a report, it actually tells them what they think it's going to tell them, so the decision makers can do it. So there's an economic incentive for entities to get this right themselves. Obviously, the auditor's mindset is quite different in the sense that whilst we may start with the same objective, they also need to make sure that it's complete. And so that imposes its own obligations on them. So the data standardization work that's going on has, I think, some really promising work to do there, because if you're an auditor and the entity you're auditing is using data standardization, then now you've got another tool that you can use to satisfy yourself that the entity is doing more themselves to control what goes into that data, so that they themselves can have more confidence in it, which gives you some tools to work with when you're starting to look at it yourself. it really is an interesting topic, and it seems so far that where we're finding use cases, there's a lot in the financial services industries. We're seeing a lot in other parts, but at least the one thing I've seen that's very good is it does seem to be a bit of a global shift. Seeing a lot of large companies starting to appoint chief data officers, and I think that's certainly a trend that's great. The interesting thing is I think it's now starting to spread out to some other industries beyond financial services. So that's obviously a very positive sign.
Thanks, Brad. We don't have any other raised hands, Mr. Chairman and Brian.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Brian. And thank you, Brett, very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brett, for the update and the information on the working group's activities over there. That is it for the IESBA Technology Working Group presentation section as well. So Stavros, I think it's back to you to announce a break.
Yes, it is indeed. So we're going to go on a 15-minute break. It's well, it's 35 past the hour, so we'll be back at 50 past the hour. Okay, thank you. Okay, dear colleagues, I hope you enjoyed the break. Let us come back. The topic on this part of the session now is the technology. And I would like to ask Rich Huskin, technology, the task force, the project. So Rich, your turn.
Well, thank you very much. And hello to everybody. We're going to cover a number of things if we look at slide 2 tonight. But before I do that, I wanted to say the primary objective for the task force. Can we move forward a slide, please? For tonight is to get the feedback and the sense of the board. And I very much appreciate and want to thank those board members who submitted comments over the last few days, including some just a few hours ago. Feel free to reiterate those or not on us when we get to those appropriate places, but I want to assure you that all of them have already started looking at them, and all of them will be carefully addressed. And that's really a big part of this session, is to get some sense of the board. I'd also share with the board that since our last board meeting, we did have a couple of important, many meetings, but a couple of important meetings with third parties, and very appreciative of the feedback we got from the CEAOB and their members. Was very thoughtful and helpful. And likewise, we had an excellent session with the national standard setters, and again, had very good feedback from that. So with that, move to the next slide briefly and just remind that the overall approach here is we've recognized that the task force on slide 3 is that technology is pervasive, and it's impacting all aspects of what professional accountants in practice and in business are involved with. And it's important to recognize interrelated nature when trying to comply with the fundamental principles. So if we move to, as you know, we had the phase 1 report was issued a while back, and it had some recommendations in it. This is on slide 4. But I wanted to reiterate that in general, the conclusion of the phase 1 report was the code was appropriate and sufficient, but there were 7 areas to consider either for NAM or potential revisions to the code. And I think you'll see that as we talk through this, there is definitely revisions to the code proposed as a result of that. I also, though, need to point out, if we could go to slide 5, the original project to phase 1 report was prior to the completion of two very important projects. The first one being the ones represented here on role and mindset. And some of the recommendations in the phase one report were in fact addressed by the role and mindset task force and in that standard. And in particular, important elements, changes in section 110.1 and 112.1 related to undue reliance on and including technology is one of those areas that might occur. In 113, changes to maintain the changes related to maintaining professional competence requiring continuing awareness and an understanding of the relevant technical, professional, business, and technology related developments were additions made. And then in 120.12a2 in the bias, the automation bias was an important consideration. And we'll comment on that further as we get to some of the individual recommendations in each of these where we are building on to role and mindset without otherwise making any changes. And then on slide 6, the other pronouncement I was alluding to was obviously the non-assurance services and the very important changes that were made to that, to the code through that, many of which address technology-related aspects, particularly certainly the self-review threat, but also the recognition in 600.5 around the evolution of markets and changes in technology are some of the developments that are out there and we need to be mindful of. And as we look at the slide 7, I think in particular, besides the reference to change in 600.9, the task force, the NAS task force took on routine and mechanical and made some important clarifications there. And also made it clear that the self-review threat could apply to all IT systems and process services, and particularly those that relate to the form part of the internal control over financial reporting, or that generate information in the client's accounting records. And so those are, as we went through this, we were very sensitive to not changing sections that were important to either, particularly to the NAS as it's in its implementation phase. And we'll talk about that, in fact, in a moment here. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as it relates to the fundamental principles and the conceptual framework and really the changes or the recommendations that impact parts 1 and 2 of the code, this is a bit of a summary of some of the task force proposals. We will go through slides that talk about each of these in detail. I would highlight though the second bullet down here, and that was this important point of emphasizing that professional activity might be performed by individuals, but it also could be performed by technology within the employee organization or the accounting firm. We have as a task force looked at first at making, there was a suggestion that maybe there would be a change to the wording in 613A1 and also a corresponding edit in 126A3. But after getting some helpful feedback, we're going to take a little different approach and maybe perhaps look to insert in a additional application material in the appropriate section up front, not just in 600, but up in the 120 factors area, something that references this a bit better. Although we do address some considerations that tie to this that I'll get to when I get to recommendation 7 back in 600. But we view this as not just applicable to the part 4, but should be addressed in part 1. If we could then, let's take a look at the recommendations, at least the start with them. I'm going to go through at least 4 of them here, and then I'm going to pause for feedback on those 4, and then we'll pick up some more and pause for feedback as we go through those to try to break up the presentation that way. Obviously, recommendation 1 is reflected here, and if you look at how it called for promoting the ethical behavior as a critical, consistent foundation for business and firms. And the way we're addressing that is pretty word for word, actually. If you look at the next slide in 100.2, it's an explicit statement that the professional accountants have a broader role in promoting ethical behavior, and addresses those points that were in the recommendation very explicitly. By the way, the straw man obviously reflects all of these changes. Some of the slides I have will show the changes. There's a few where, in the interest of space, we're just going to make reference back to what's in the straw man. So for recommendation 2, there was also a proposal to effectively deal with the impact of complexity. We've talked about that at length in the prior sessions, prior board meetings. And we have, as you are still working on that, is basically what slide 12 will show you. We believe that we are heading towards including some discussion of complexity as a factor in considering applying the fundamental principles in the conceptual framework, consistent with the 82% feedback in the survey, as well as feedback we've received from other important stakeholders. Not changing the any of the actual fundamental frameworks or threats. And we will probably consider putting examples in consistent with an earlier straw man you might have seen as far back as December of 2020. So with that, I would move us to the next slide, please. Sorry. The other important recommendation that permeates across the board was this question about, is it clear that we're supposed to be transparent as professional accountants? And to address that, right up front in 111, we would propose to include some comment about transparency or the lack of transparency, as well as in 113, address the importance of when we make users aware of the nature of the services, that includes consideration of any limitations or inherent uncertainties within that. And that's really designed, the concept, I guess, was quoted to ensure that the professional accountant is shedding the appropriate light. And certainly in situations where the omitting something would cause a lack of transparency, the professional accountant should have a responsibility to not allow that to occur. And then in recommendation 4 on the next slide, this really has is focused on part 2, and that it is it reflects some changes, given the changes that were made by the Role and Mindset Project, but proposes to insert in part 2 some important factors, principally explicit reference to technology related to relying on the work of others, as well as try to be clear that when we're talking about professional accountants in business, we recognize that the role and the level of the individual will impact or should be a factor in what they might be in a position to influence or have a say on. The approach attempts to recognize that PAs may not be expert in every piece of technology, but should have the ability to, or the make the effort to make sure they understand enough about how the output from the technology is appropriate. And that can include consideration of the system of quality controls around development or internal controls around the systems in general, and or their IT systems in general and technology specifically involved, as well as how the output is analyzed and controlled. the concept here would be it is appropriate perhaps to rely on aspects of what the organization has in place, but not do so in a way that means you don't really understand the output and whether it's appropriate. So I'm going to stop here for those first 4 recommendations. Are a little varied there, but I thought that would be a good breaking point to see if there are comments or feedback that board members would like to provide on any of those 4 approaches to addressing the recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, Rich. I see Caroline with a raised hand. Caroline?
Thanks, Stavros. Thanks, Rich. I'm just going back to recommendation 1 and the proposed addition of text in the strawman. To me, I thought the point was really around reference to technology and bringing out the idea of thinking about how the professional accountant or its employing organization or its firm uses and develops technology, and the additional text that was included in terms of I think the impact on society. To me, it's already addressed in what we have from the very start, where we talk about the importance of the confidence in the profession. So I don't really see much value in that additional sentence, especially when there's no reference to the development or use of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Rich, would you mind if we collect some other
please.
comments?
So let's keep let's collect as many as possible here.
Okay. Thank you. I have Lisbeth. Please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Rich, I want to echo Caroline's comment here. You probably have seen it, the same comments in my advanced comments submitted to you. I also agree with the fact that this was addressed in the role and mindset project. As long as there is no change as a result of technology matter, I really don't see what the added value is of having that additional statement here. So I would want to ask the task force to revisit this one and to actually bring in the point of developing, what was it again? Developing technology, I believe, and using technology, sorry. Do you want me to go through the other ones as well, or are you going one by one now?
No, we'll do all 4, the first 4 here if we can.
Can you go through the slides, because it's a little difficult just out of my memory, especially at this late hour.
Perhaps go
yeah, on complexity, I don't have any significant comments. Perhaps the location as is proposed now could be potentially better after the section on bias. That was just a suggestion in my advanced comments. So on the next one, yeah, on this one, I think I appreciate the addition of lack of transparency, but I find the omission or obscurity would be misleading. That is an important concept in that sentence, and I actually presented a rewrite of this one. I'm just going through. There is also, what is lacking there is a lack of transparency on what. So I think what the sentence should be is something along following lines. So omits or obscures required information where such omission or obscurity would be misleading, and there is a lack of transparency on such or on that fact. I think that is more clearly well, giving an explanation as to why it is severe. But also here, what is the direct link with technology in this particular one? Then with respect to making aware of the nature of services, I've made this comment in previous board meetings as well. This is a requirement. So it means that the PEA needs to make the client or its employing organization aware of the nature of the services. And for a PAPP, I think that requirement can be met through an engagement letter or through a contract. But I can see some issues for a PAIB, like for instance, an accounting clerk. Does this requirement actually expect that that accounting clerk every morning tells its employing organization, well, today I'm going to be doing this, this, or that? I really don't see the need for having that addition. What is really key in this requirement, as is today, is the fact that you need to be transparent on limitations or uncertainties as part of your service. And then what was the fourth one? Yeah, on this one, yeah, my reaction here was, well, I'm not so sure that reliance on technology is really linked to seniority. Actually, when you think about it, the youngsters are much more knowledgeable about technology and how much they can rely on it than senior accountants. So I would actually argue to the opposite, and we also heard it in the first presentation today. The older the PAs, the less knowledge and experience with technology they have. So I think this is actually a wrong statement, as is here. And then also on that first bullet, I would urge the task force to work together with Ken and Carla to make sure that it is aligned to the conforming amendments project that we will be discussing on Monday. I had a couple of other suggestions, but I sent them all in advance to you, so I will stop here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Shall I stop here, Rich?
I think there's some other hands up.
Okay. So I see Mike Ashley. Mike?
Thanks, Stavros. I'd echo some of the comments made already, Rich, so I won't do that at great length, but I do think if we're putting this forward as something coming out of a technology task force, it needs to be more linked to some of the technology issues than just wordsmithing things that we've done already around role and mindset. So certainly as far as recommendation 1 is concerned, I wasn't keen on it, I suppose is the best way to express it. And in particular, I'm not sure that all accountants are ideally placed as would be portrayed here either. I mean, the more junior ones, I'd suspect, aren't really well positioned in order to promote ethical behavior necessarily. Depends on the role they're playing in the organization. So I'm not sure it adds a great deal, that particular one. Recommendation 2, obviously, I wait to see what you come up with. So all with that. And recommendation 3, if I remember the recommendation originally, it was talking about whether or not actually the professional accountant should have a positive obligation to be transparent. And we can argue the merits or otherwise of that, but this doesn't do that for me. Merely replacing obscurity with lack of transparency does not actually take it a great deal. And I do regard that as wordsmithing. I'm not sure it gets me very far at all. So certainly as far as recommendation 3 is concerned, that transparency piece. And again, the emphasis in current 113.3 is around making people aware of the nature of limitations, and you could potentially add in inherent uncertainties. I have no objection to that, but it's that rather than the nature of the services including. It's the emphasis is on the inherent is on the limitations and, as I say, potentially inherent uncertainties. And recommendation 4, I was reasonably comfortable generally, though, although I found the way it's expressed with taking into account position and seniority slightly odd, because I think it is just another factor. So I think one of the factors you would take into account is what the professional accountant's position and seniority is in the employing organization, and the role that they're playing is also a factor in determining whether or not it is reasonable for them to rely. So I don't think it's, if you like, an overriding factor that encompasses all the rest. It is just another factor. But those are my observations. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Maybe, Rich, you could comment on those, because I see that a lot is accumulating.
Yeah, let me on this point, Mike mentioned it a bit earlier, but it ties to his last comment on comment 4, and Elizabeth answered it. The issue we were trying to deal with is that professional accountants who might be in relatively low levels, who are asked to do tasks that are analysis and generation of maybe budgets and things like that, they're not in a position to challenge whether the systems that are generating the information they're provided to work with. And so that was the concept that we were really trying to deal with, the fact that the more senior people would naturally bear a stronger responsibility. But the points are well taken, and we should consider that. I think some of the other comments run to an issue where the task force, at least in my impression, is how it's been looked at, is that the code is a principles based, and these are the most, in the front, in the 100 section in particular. And we can get technology into every paragraph, but is that the right answer to the code? So we'll go back and look at that. I do think on that first point on recommendation 1, there is a strong argument that maybe this should be addressed through NAM, but we can come back and go through that. All the other points I think are valid for us to further consider, and we will do so. I don't know that I have anything to specifically respond on those.
Okay, so you want me to continue with other comments?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I see Andy. Andy?
Thank you. Yeah, on recommendation 1, I'm actually responding favorably to what it's intending to communicate, but I do appreciate the seeming lack of lineup with the technology remit. So I might leave it to others to see if this is beyond the remit of what this project is. But having said that, I think it was an important sentiment, and some of my issues dealt more with the aspect, I think, as Mike raised, whether all accountants in their role can actually promote, and I didn't react favorably to the word promote because that sounded like a management function, and I respond more favorably toward like advanced support, demonstrate, or exhibit. But otherwise, I did respond favorably to having some overarching comment like this within the code itself. But I do appreciate it might be a stretch to. It seems like one of those legislative amendments that get tagged on to the technology one that maybe it exceeded that. But setting that technicality aside, I'm responding favorably to something like this in the code. I think the rest of mine are beyond recommendations 4 right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. And I see Ian. Ian, please.
Thanks, Davros, and thanks, Rich, and the task force. I did like the measured and light touch approach you've taken overall, so good going there. I, like Andy, I did like the declaratory statement in 100.2, but do accept there's not much a strong linkage apparently at the moment with the technology task force work, but I kind of liked the statement. And the only other comment I had was in 113.3, where making clients aware of inherent limitations, which was extending the inherent uncertainties, extending the previous reference to only limitations. I did wonder, Rich, about the unbounded nature of inherent limitations and whether we were extending the obligations on professional accountants here, and did worry a bit about that. So I'd be in favour of sticking with limitations going forward, but we'll leave that to the task force. Thank you. That was all, but well done.
Thank you, Ian. And the last hand I see is Galen.
Thank you, Stavros. And I'm not going to repeat some of what I've already heard. I do support what I heard about recommendations 1 and 2, 2 on complexity as being a factor. Then I got to the recommendation number 3 on transparency, and a little bit like Elizabeth, I wondered what we were specifically talking about, being transparent about what, and then on a sort of a spectrum of transparency, you know, at the other end of it, there might be an issue with confidentiality, and I wonder whether the task force had given that some thought. In particular, if matters such as proprietary nature of certain technology or client matters might be an element of that, and could that present some particular problems? So that the extent of transparency, I guess, is what I fixated on, Richard.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. Richard, well, Jeff, do you see another hand? Because I don't see another.
There are no other raised hands at this stage.
Yeah,
Okay.
Galen, that interplay of transparency and confidentiality is something that we've got some more work to do on. So agree with that. Okay. So why don't we, if we could move back to recommendation 5 now. And this is in fact about confidentiality and privacy. And you can see on the next slide what actually, this is where you need to think about what's in the straw man. There are 2 options presented. They are not all that different, other than option A continues to preserve some of the first 3 subparagraphs that are in the existing code, whereas option B takes a view that by eliminating those first three subparagraphs, the following 2 essentially pick up and cover what was in those. And so that's an important, that's a big part of the distinction. Both of them include a more active, scalable action word with regard to protect. I have noted that there has been some feedback already objecting to the use of the word protect, but we'll pause in a moment to talk about that. Also, there's some adding of some words that around access is granted it's just viewed as a slight modernization. And then some application material in 114.1A3 to promote a better consistency of understanding what is confidential and highlight the relevance of privacy is addressed in the definition, which is at the very end of the straw man. And that obviously is an important element of this. With that, I think I'd like to open this up and get perspectives on options you prefer, and certainly things and components that you would like don't feel need addressed in here, or perhaps don't need addressed in here. I would say one other thing that I think there is a view that confidentiality is perhaps one of the most important considerations. In fact, some would say, and I'm probably in this school, that everything from a professional accountant's perspective, everything, particularly in practice, everything about the relationship with a client, including that there is a relationship with the client, is confidential, and that all manner of effort should be made to maintain that. I would also note that there has been some comments that the concept of protect raises questions about what happens when third parties act in an illegal or unethical way and you get hacked, and how do we think through that? So I'd be curious, not just on what I said about the options and the content within the options, but particularly any feedback on the use of the word or the concept of protecting the confidential information.
Thank you, Rich. Stopping for comment and questions, including the points that Rich has just put up about the word protect, the concept protect. I see Lisbeth.
Thank you. Yeah, on the point of protect, I hadn't really thought that far ahead yet, but now that you mention it, I actually think it's a good term, because a PA does have some form of responsibility to ensure that the data cannot be hacked. So you do have to protect the information, I think. So from that perspective, I'm not so concerned about having that statement in here. When it comes to option A or B, when you compare the two, they aren't that much different. They are reorganizing the order a little bit. So in itself, the change isn't that big. And so from that perspective, I'm wondering, do we really want to put some expectations on our PAOs to start redrafting their codes again, just for these minimal changes effectively? And then further, I do believe that you're missing in option B some important concepts like inadvertent disclosing information and keeping the data within the company. Those are really important. When we have confidentiality breaches at our firm, it's because, as an example, people are talking on a train on their mobile to their clients, and they are inadvertently disclosing information without really thinking further, or they're just forwarding their work email to their private email, to which their spouses also have access. So they're disclosing information outside of the company. So these 2 points, I do believe, if you go for option B, should be embedded in there as well.
Elizabeth, could I just ask you on your first point though, and on this inadvertent disclosure, you might lean more towards option A then, keeping the detail?
Yeah, I personally, when you compare the two, they are not that different.
Right.
It's just changing the order a little bit, changing a little bit the wording, but not that much. And so do we really want our PAOs to start changing their codes again because of this minimal change?
Yeah, fair point.
But in B, what I'm really missing is these 2 important points on inadvertent disclosing and keeping the information within the company.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You see Andy? Andy?
Yes, since you asked specifically, I just wanted to give my support for more of an option A. And while I had a big internal argument with myself about the word protect, at the end of the day, I liked it. So, I mean, there are other words to use like preserve or otherwise, but it ought to be something affirmative that the professional accountant does, not just to respect the confidentiality or to maintain it, but to do something to keep it safe. So I was okay with that word, but if there are others to vote on, I'll consider that.
Thanks.
And Ian.
Just quickly, certainly I favoured option A too for the reasons stated. And normally I would use the word safeguard rather than protect because it's just a little bit softer. But I know the code uses safeguards in a different context or in other ways. So a bit of a judgment required there. But safeguards, I think, is a better word than protect. Protect is more absolute in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. I think Mike has his hand up.
Yes, Mike.
Thanks, Stavros. Yeah, I'm
in favor of option A, I think largely for the reasons that people have articulated, but also if we are making some changes, I think actually preserving most of the language, but inserting something new forces people to pay attention to the something new rather than it being lost in some subtle rewording of a more general nature. I don't have strong views on the term protect or safeguard or preserve, all of which I think could be used. I do think in the application material where you've actually got something about protection being important, you could actually get more benefit if you actually talk a little bit more about what protecting information is as well as why it's important.
Okay.
So I think you could use that application paragraph to get across the key message better, would be my only suggestion.
All right. Thank you.
And Caroline.
Thanks, Rich. When I looked at the two options, it was a challenge trying to figure out what the difference is, and I believe that option A would be a better choice, and for the reasons that Lisbeth mentioned. In terms of protect, like Ian, I thought that safeguard would be a good choice of word, but maybe what could be considered is also around taking steps to protect, so that would be the responsibility of the professional accountant, that they had put certain controls in place. I mean, if those controls happen to be breached, then it the fact that they made an active step might help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we also have a comment from Sanjeev.
Yes, Sanjeev.
Thanks, Stavros. I think I still can't raise my hand virtually. Some technology problem in a technology session. I think I would still go with the word protect, I think, as is here in the strawman, because safeguard, I think, is the word which is used with the code in a different manner. So protect may be a stronger word, but I think one can go with it. And between the two options, I think option A would be a better option. Thank you.
Thank you.
You see anyone else, Jeff?
Are there no other raised hands?
Back to you, Rich.
All right. So
I think you got sufficient.
yes,
comments.
I do, and that was very helpful. So let's move to slide 19, I believe it is. Yeah, recommendation 6. And again, this was to think about beyond what role and mindset would end up doing, which it did, as I mentioned at the beginning, did address some things. What would we consider, whether there are additional application material to highlight the importance of professional other soft skills. So I think as we move to slide 20, you will see some sizable adjustments to 113, but trying not to delete or reduce the importance of what was there before, but expand on the principle on professional competence and due care by including some of the types of skills that might be needed, but not necessarily achieved through technology, but would be needed in order to properly understand and work with technology. As you look through that, we would say we are incorporating throughout several of the paragraph changes some of the competency skills that are in the international education standards. We do make this reference to growth mindset, which I would admit we're perhaps still at least somewhat struggling with that word, but the concept here would be that it requires an active approach to understanding the ongoing changes in technology and the use of technology and the evolution of new aspects, besides just continuing professional development, and it's a continuous, maybe a continuous acquisition of skills concept. But we're certainly open to other words, because it's a phrase that's in my mind is a little popular today, but it's not necessarily specifically defined somewhere. And so we may need to expand that. And then in the end, we do make reference in the last paragraph to the international standards, but recognize that the concept of professional competency requirements is definitely within the individual jurisdiction's responsibility from that standpoint. We did get some feedback in the process not to specifically suggest that those are the only standards that are out there and that could be considered. So again, I'm going to pause here for any thoughts or comments in this area.
Thank you, Rich. Do we have any hands, Jeff?
Yes, we have Lisbeth and then Andy.
Let's start with Lisbeth, please.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you're trying to bring in the concepts from the IES in the definition of professional competence. I support that. I have some suggestions on improving the language. But what I think is an important concept and which is removed is the fact that it is about ensuring that the client or the employing organization receives competent service. So I'm a little bit disappointed that that important fact is removed now by just trying to put in all these different expectations under the IES. So I would want you to check if somehow we cannot get that important concept back in here. And then with respect to the growth mindset concept, well, this paragraph was redrafted as part of the role and mindset project. So I'm wondering why we are tinkering the language again already now. I believe we talked even at that time about a growth mindset, and it was decided not to go that route because of the reasons that you just brought up. It's one of those buzzwords, in my opinion, that we should try to avoid in the code. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Andy?
Yep. Also, thank you. Thumbs up on the International Education Standards reference. The 113A1 with the professional skills might include critical thinking, etc. I don't dispute it, but I am concerned with well, especially with critical thinking and being perhaps as something either in conflict or different than the words used in the role and mindset. Standard. So, but perhaps the issue is you didn't want to have the circular use of professional in the sentence and applying professional knowledge, and you change it to technical. So I think I might recommend, instead of having the professional skills might include, is some adjective like sufficient technical knowledge or adequate technical knowledge or something along that line. For the task force to consider instead of listing them off. The other one dealt with the next paragraph on the growth mindset, and it is a bit of a weird sentence to begin with, that in an application there is something about professional competence requires something, and it requires awareness and understanding. And I understand your point is that you want to transform it into some sort of action besides awareness and understanding. And so I too am not responding favorably to growth mindset, but I think other than the weird, I think the paragraph is written actually does communicate that it requires continuing awareness and understanding. And so other than adding something and the professional accountant needs to take an action to make sure they are there with the right knowledge, which doesn't probably belong in an application sentence. I like how it goes.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Andy. And I see Sadiga.
Well done to the task group for giving us words to look at. I really appreciated it. I have similar comments to the previous people who have spoken, so I won't repeat them. The word that I wanted to look at was critical thinking. This is very similar to the word that was used in role and mindset, which is critical reasoning and critical assessment. So it might be getting confusing if we're using a different word. On the first paragraph, R1131 A and B, I liked the previous way where the first paragraph, the A, just dealt with the attaining and maintaining, and the second paragraph dealt with the action. And now that we've put in apply to the first one, we've kind of lost the distinction between those two. And my last comment was that as we change small words, like adding professional skills, we just need to consider the consequential amendments to the rest of the code. So an addition of professional skills actually has about 34 references throughout the code. And I think about it as we update at jurisdictional level, that whether this is really required, does it add value before we make these amendments?
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Sadiga.
Yep. Yes.
Can I go on, Rich? I have two more.
Sure, please.
Caroline.
Thanks, Stavros. Rich, I echo everything that was said before. So in terms of growth mindset, and professional skills that we've sort of introduced here, I think it's also important to think about whether these are words that can be translated, whether they'll be interpreted in a consistent manner, or would they be subject to misinterpretation. So professional knowledge to me is clear, but I'm not sure I understand what professional skills are, especially when we describe it as leadership and communication and collaboration. So it sounds very fuzzy and vague to me. So I think it would be useful going back to review what we discussed as a board in terms of the role and mindset, because a lot of some of it actually was considered there. And then going back to what I said on recommendation 1 as well, the link to technology, I don't really see that coming through in these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Shall I stop, Rich, or shall I go on?
No, please. We've got a couple more hands here, I think.
Mike.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, Stavros. Thank you. I would echo much of what's been said. I do think in looking at changes like this, Rich, we've really got to be asking ourselves, do we think it's going to make any difference to how people are actually going to behave, or are we wordsmithing? Because wordsmithing and expecting PAOs to change all their codes because we've decided to express the same sentiment slightly differently, I don't think is adding value. And certainly when I read the previous one, which was talking about professional knowledge and skills, I automatically in my mind was applying that adjective to the second of those two anyway. So it was both professional knowledge and professional skills. And if you're then changing the first one to technical knowledge, what's you trying to make me think differently between technical knowledge and professional knowledge? Is there a distinction that I need to worry about?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I do think I pick up Elizabeth's point. I think it's good to look at this from the perspective of what somebody is receiving, not just what we're trying to give. And I do think it's also important, which is the other bit that you've lost here, is it's, if you like, it's something which is based on current technical and professional standards, because those also evolve. And again, what we're looking for is for an accountant to be able to deliver according to today's standards, not necessarily tomorrow's standards.
Thank you, Mike. And Vanya.
Thank you, Travis. I would just like to put my support for these changes here. I agree that we can change the word in order to have more reference to technology in the wording here, but I like especially the detailment of the professional skills and the reference to the international education standards, because as a representative from IESBA at the education panel, I've been in frequent contact with Helen, and something that we are discussing is that there are some confusion in the market that the end of IESBA has resulted in a weakness for the international education standards, and that's not the case. They must be supported and spread all over the other standard setters. So I love the reference of the international education standards here, just to highlight that.
Thank you. Vanya, I don't see any other hand. Do you, Jeff? Or
No, there are no other raised hands.
So Richard, I think you got.
Yeah, this is very helpful. I think one of the things I think I would observe is that in many cases, if you think about the effectiveness and the principle that was in the code all along, you could argue that it applies to everything, whether it's technology or not. And do you need to actually have any changes that are just specific to try to bring the word technology in? So I think we can go back and look at this to revisit role and mindset. That obviously was predates me, and take a look at how we I can tell you we didn't intend to lose that point that I think Elizabeth made and Mike reiterated around the competence and what is delivered to the employing organization or to the client. So we'll go back. Those are valid, very helpful comments. Thank you. So let's move to recommendation 7, which gets. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just one moment. I see Brian. Brian has a raised hand. Brian?
Yep. Thanks, Stavros. I just wanted to chime in on the last point there. It may look like a subtle difference in terms of what's happening with the principles wording there and adding professional attitudes, values, and ethics in. Where that's coming from is if you look back at the recommendation 6, what the task force was sort of assigned is to highlight the importance of professional or soft skills, and then consideration around the addition of a reference to the IESs. And so that's sort of where that's coming from. And just to give maybe a quick recap of where the task force got the basics of the wording, and I'm certainly not suggesting that the words are perfect as is, that they're not, and we should do some work on them. But where the concept comes in is that we were toying with how much of the IESs to put in, and should there be specific examples put in? Should we make more direct reference to some of the ideas in there? But then the more we started thinking about it, the more we thought, the professional values, ethics, and attitudes, which is direct language from the IESs, are things that we felt were already embodied in the code. If you think about the code, the values, ethics, and attitudes, and again, now you'd have to go back into the IESs and specifically into the components that deal with the attitudes, values, and ethics, and think about what the code does to meet those educational standard obligations. And I think we saw a very strong fit between them. And so in that way, we were really trying to be elegant to say, we don't need to add more wording within our code that expressly gets into what those values and attitudes are, certainly not the ethics, because they're already embodied in the language of the code, and yet it would be useful to bring that out, because that's, again, where that recommendation 6 came from, was stakeholders saying, you really ought to be bringing this into the code. And we're saying, you know, it's actually in the code, but maybe we just need to point out the fact that it's there and that it's already embodied within the language that we have available. And then, of course, the delineation between, or that distinction between technical knowledge and professional skills was the other thing that's trying to be brought out there. So I just thought I'd give a little more background about that.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have anyone else now? I can't hear you, Jeff.
Mike, your hand is still raised. Was that a follow-up question? Mike? Or? Oh, no. I think there are no other raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Rich.
Yep. Why don't we move to actually to the next slide, if we could be on that. The recommendation 7 simply said to address whether there were needs for changes in part 4 of the code. And so slide 22, please, summarizes some of the things that the task force has been looking through. I'm going to make a comment on a couple of these here, and then we have slides with straw man text for most of the other ones. Right now, the task force, the first bullet, is not recommending including a separate section to cover technology-enabled NAS. Generally, the view was technology enables almost all types of services in this day and age, and therefore trying to just single that out did not make sense. The task force also, in the second bullet, references taking some time to deliberate the placement of application material around the fact that a service is automated doesn't limit it to just, in plain words, something as simple as accounting and bookkeeping services. And therefore, the task force took the point of suggesting a change to 400, or an addition of 414A1, to emphasize that the automation is something that should absolutely require one to consider whether the professional accountant in practice had assumed a management responsibility. And then I think we also, as I noted earlier, tried to address certain aspects around the manner in which the service is provided, as well as the frequency in which the service is provided. And we will we'll come back to that in a moment. And so those are a couple points. I'll talk about each of these individually on slides, so I don't want to spend more time here. Let's move to slide 23. So one of the things in that category is whether there are more examples of business relationships to be considered for inclusion. I think the proposal here is to highlight examples of what are considered close business relationships, where there might arise a mutuality of interest. 2 specific examples are being suggested here. One involves a scenario in which the professional accountant is using an audit client software in delivering of services to other clients. And the second is a scenario where the professional accountant is using the firm's technology, where the audit client is using the auditor's technology in a manner that involves delivering services to its customers. And both of those have been added as examples that would suggest those are close business relationships that would not be appropriate. If we can move to slide 24, another important element, and we've talked about this in prior meetings, so I'm going to be very quick, is simply this is the statement that we've put in here to make it clear that when we're talking about the provision of NAS, that it can be because it was provided by professionals, by technology, or a combination of both, and that the you know, this is part of the point we've made. And as we saw in the survey, we're all a little taken aback by about a quarter of the respondents suggesting that they didn't necessarily have to think about non-assurance services in some cases when they use technology. And likewise, the next slide shows a similar issue addressing the fact that when you sell or license technology to an audit client, you absolutely need to think about the fact of whether you are in compliance with the provisions in section 600. And we see those as somewhat related and put them in both places. With that, let's move to routine and mechanical on the next slide. Obviously, NAS addressed the points that are on the top part of this slide. And the proposal that we're looking at is just to address some additional guidance to build off of what NAS did. And that to clarify, and if you look at the next slide, the straw man language is there. Basically, this is designed to clarify that an automated task is not necessarily routine and mechanical just because of the ease with which it's performed or for the lack of human involvement. And that you should absolutely have to assess whether that technology essentially reflects and the functions of that technology reflects that there is actually expertise or judgment that was provided by the owner of that technology in the development and essentially the intellectual property embedded in it, and needs to be considered as when you think about whether what you're providing is routine and mechanical. So that brings us to the question about off the shelf on slide 28. And the view here has been a discussion around the risk that the involvement in off-the-shelf accounting or financial information systems software might create a self-review threat, particularly in that it could impact the financial statements in which an opinion would be expressed, or also, and very importantly, be effectively create aspects of the firm's, or excuse me, the client system of internal control. And therefore, if you look at slide 29, the task force proposes to remove from 606-482 the last subparagraph and indicate that it does not, remove it from the exception that suggests these activities that would not usually create a threat, and in fact suggest it is a threat that needs to be assessed. The task force would still maintain that for non-PIs, there are the safeguard that exists in the existing statement, which was continued with the in the NAS would continue, but that we would think that the prohibition that was put through with NAS would be applicable, and that you would not implement off-the-shelf software for a PIE in the area of financial services or financial systems, or if it impacts controls. If we could move to slide 30, and we'll stop in a moment after we cover this and one other point for feedback. We did consider the feedback we've received from a variety of sources about whether hosting related activities is appropriate, including custody or storing of clients' data or records. I think in general, the task force's view would be yes, this is an area where you would be assuming a management responsibility. And does it involve hosting a custody of client assets? We're going to talk about that a little later. I think the gist of it is we don't think data at this time meets the definition of an asset as defined in other professional standards. But if you go to slide 31, you can see that we've also expanded to include prohibitions on essentially providing services to related to hosting, maintaining, monitoring, updating systems. I will note there's brackets around these words. This is very early straw man on some of this. Reflects thinking to date. But this is designed to highlight that there are services in the IT area that go beyond simply the design, development, and implementation of hardware and software. And that's perhaps one of the evolutions in technology that's out there. This is very responsive to the survey respondents' requests to deal with hosting, collecting, storing data, ongoing maintenance, and non-financial consideration of whether how do you deal with non-financial systems. In general, I'd say overall the task force view is these should all be prohibited. I would note though that we do intend that this ban would apply to all clients, not just PIEs. As the current thinking is, even though as we wrote it in the drafting structure and the straw man probably didn't make that clear. And we definitely would like feedback on that in this discussion, very much so. I would share that we got some interesting feedback on this issue in general from our discussions with the regulatory group. And they made a point that invariably when something goes wrong, there's corruption of data, there's a breakdown in the system, it's hard to understand how the party responsible for the activity isn't going to be actively involved in fixing that. And that would seem very quickly to get into self-review threats and management responsibilities. Secondly, I would want to clarify that we only intend this to involve, currently to involve financial systems. We were not intending to expand to non-financials, but that's another point, non-financial systems we want to discuss. And I would note that we do later on intend to address some things in section 950. We have not yet gotten to that at this point. So with that, I'm going to stop, pause, and ask for input on what you saw, starting with in the recommendation 7 here. Any of those points that we've walked through is put that open for input. In particular, on this last one, we have a couple specific questions as outlined. So,
okay, thank you, Rich. I already see Lisbeth.
Thank you. Yeah, Rich, I think this went extremely fast, but I do understand it is in the interest of time. And actually, a lot of the points that were discussed here or put on the slides are very important. And I do think they do require some further discussion at the board at some later point. However, I did provide my immediate reactions already in advance to you. On this one, as you are specifically asking for it, I do agree with the fact that these examples don't smell right from an independence perspective. Somehow they are all related to what we call application management services, AMS. So basically a form of outsourcing of an activity by the client to an audit firm. And that would indeed lead to a conclusion as to whether you're assuming a management responsibility because you are taking the responsibility for maintaining internal controls. So from that perspective, I fully agree that these 4 bullets here should be prohibited services. Definitely for PIEs. For non-PIEs, I would think I would come to exactly the same conclusion because of the fact that it is assuming a management responsibility. Where I'm struggling with, though, is the R paragraph, because it is referring to more than outsourcing services per se. Look at, for instance, at maintaining or updating those services actually could be linked to design and implementation of a software package, for instance. So it's just if you're allowed to do D&I of a technology, why would you not be allowed to do subsequent maintenance or applying a patch to that software? So I think we need to separate that sentence or that part of the IT system services in different bits. So operating and monitoring would then be linked to these examples. And then maintaining or updating can be linked to designing and implementing, and then hosting is a different bit again, because I actually disagree with the fact that there should be a full prohibition of hosting. What is wrong with hosting data as part of a permissible service? What would be wrong with hosting some information on a tax compliance service when the tax compliance service is fully permissible? But that, as I said, everything that is quickly ran through, there are many areas where we need to look more at the details before we can really conclude as to whether what is permitted, what is not permitted. So, but yeah, at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm not sure I'm able to go through all of these points in detail.
Elizabeth, if I could ask you a question, and then I do want to comment on something you just said there, so that it may help others. But going back, when you said that you referenced the first sentence and said, look, if you're allowed to do the financial systems design and implementation, why wouldn't you be able to do the patch? Are you referring to where we would allow that for a non-financial system and or for a non-PI? Or are you suggesting it's okay to do these services for a PI?
No. For a PI, because we would never be doing D&I of an SAP system at a PI, because that would clearly result in a self-review threat. So it would be prohibited. So as a result of that, you can't do updates or maintenance of that software either. No. I fully agree with you. However, for a non-financial system, when there is really no self-review threat, I wouldn't see why you couldn't be doing the maintenance or the updates for a PI.
And we're on bar. We need to get this, as I said, the drafting doesn't make it clear that we weren't intending to scope in non-financial here. So I appreciate that. And then let me comment on this thing on hosting. The idea here is not that if you're providing a service and the client provides you data and you develop data like a tax return and you're hosting that during the time you're providing the service and perhaps as part of an ongoing set of compliance services, that really isn't the client's primary record. And that's true of other services. You may be doing something that during the course of you providing the service information from the client's records, but we were more after where you're keeping the client's original version, and if they need the information, they got to go to your system to get it. And that we do see that sometimes, I think there was examples presented where there are solutions in the marketplace that would be how it works. So I think there's a distinction we were trying to make. We may not have achieved that in our wording, but we were not trying to say you couldn't have the client's data as part of the project you were working on. It was that your data and your records, and when the project ended, you can obviously, if there's stuff you created that became important to them, you would provide that back to them. But we were, again, if to the extent that what you were doing was permitted under all the other aspects of the NAS standards, we were trying to deal with this concept that we're going to host or be the data backup or security backup for somebody. That's a little slightly different, but it wasn't designed to prohibit the ability to have client data in your possession while you were providing like a tax analysis or something.
Yeah,
if that helps at all.
If I may react to that, what you're referring to is, again, outsourcing services. And that, again, I agree, is assuming a management responsibility. But that comes back to that operating and monitoring point that I just made. However, what is written now or how it's presented now, it looks like hosting in its entirety is fully prohibited. And so we should try to make that more clear in here.
Oh, fair point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, I had another point actually, but it escapes me now suddenly. I might come back.
Well, please come back.
Yeah, I will. I will look through my comments again on the point that I wanted to make. I'll come back in a second.
Mike Ashley has his hand up, I believe.
Yeah, Mike.
Thanks, Stavros. Yeah, I just echo a little bit what Elizabeth said around this. And as you approach this, Rich, I'd encourage you to do two things. One, this is all expressed in terms of IT, but not everything is IT. There are still some people who keep paper records. And therefore, if you allow something to happen just because it's on paper records, even if they're the custodians of those paper records, why would you not allow it for IT? So I was thinking really about accounting and bookkeeping services that might be permitted, for example, where the chances are that if they are providing those accounting and bookkeeping services, they're keeping the records as well.
Okay.
If they are routine and mechanical. So just think, and this is the non-PI space. This is not the PI space.
Right. I got you.
But just think about, as I say, just because it happens to be on an IT system shouldn't really make it that much different from not being on an IT system. The principles should be similar. Yeah. The other one I just wanted to raise, because I just think it needs a little bit more thought, because I think I know what you're trying to get at, but I'm not sure. It might need some more explanation, or the words doesn't quite work. When you talk about in the business relationships bit, the predominance of something, I just think that might need a bit more explanation about what we really are getting at there.
Okay.
Because otherwise you may find you're either catching stuff you don't intend to catch, or actually you're not catching stuff that you do.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, appreciate that.
I see Kim.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks, Stavros. Rich, just going back to the hosting, I'm supportive of where the task force is going with all of this. I think that the intention is appropriate. My thought is that the prohibition, once it's crafted the right way, would be for both PI and non-PI, primarily because in my mind it links to the management responsibilities, the management functions. I might have mentioned this to you before. The NAS task force at one point did have a straw man on hosting. It came very late in the game when we were looking at the NAS standards, but it may help. I don't recall all the wording right now, but it may help just with some of the wording and some of the laying it out. If I recall correctly, it was, I'll say, inspired by AICPA. They've done a lot of work in this area, as I'm sure you're aware. So I am supportive of where it's going. I do agree very much so with Lisbeth about being careful with the wording as to what is prohibited, what are we taking, I'll say, custody of, as opposed to what are we using to perform the tax return, etc.
Yep.
So I can try to dig up that wording too if you don't have it from the previous NAS discussions.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That would be useful. Yeah, you did mention that to me, Kim, but it was after we posted all the documents. So others?
Lisbeth is coming back with the point she had forgotten.
Yes, the point that I wanted to make was actually related to hosting indeed. I just want to clarify that truly hosting data is not really a service that is observed that often as happening at an accounting firm. It would require a lot of infrastructure to really be able to host data. So in reality, what accounting firms do, they set up alliances or business relationships with third parties like an IBM, for instance, in order to be able to provide their service, including the hosting. So I think it's an important concept because you might otherwise, if you decide to go for such a strong prohibition, you might end up in a situation where a PA would argue, well, we are not effectively hosting the data, so there is not an issue. despite the fact that technically speaking, there is a subcontracting arrangement in place as well with that third party. So I think it's really important to look at the specific words in this area to make sure that we don't create loopholes for accountants. Then secondly, well, listening to what Kim was saying on the, well, she was referring to management function, and there there is clearly a difference in the concept between assuming a management responsibility and performing a management function under the SEC. So also from that perspective, we need to be sure that we're not just copying something from an SEC prohibition when in reality there is that difference in concept.
Yes, there's absolutely a difference.
Yeah.
What we were really drawing on was the specific materials in 413 on internal control.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then as Mike touched on the business relationship example, I was also worried looking at the two examples, because it depends on a lot of facts and circumstances whether these examples are actually resulting in a true close business relationship or a marketplace business relationship, like we call it within our firm. The use of technology from an audit client might actually be just a vendor business relationship. So in the normal course of business that you're using, for instance, Excel to come up with a spreadsheet to make certain calculations. So that term predominantly is well, could be misleading somehow as well. So I would actually would like to ask task force to rather go for examples of co-developed solutions where together with the audit client you develop a software, or alternatively an example of a reseller arrangement where you sell the software of an audit client and you get a commission. I think those examples are much clearer for readers than the ones that are currently being used.
Okay. We did not intend, and that's where while we can challenge the word predominant was, there are things like visualization tools and things like that are ubiquitous in the marketplace. I didn't pick on the Microsoft products, but everybody uses them. Nobody is buying that service from you because you're using those visualization tools or Excel or something like that. It's where the software you're using is really helping drive the business, and also the terms that would suggest there's a mutuality between you and your audit clients who created the software. That's what we were trying to get at. But your points on the wording, we may want to come back to several of the people who commented who sent comments in writing, and we'll certainly be talking further with the board. But one of the challenges I'm concerned about is we could end up with pages and pages of examples and still not cover everything. We're really trying to figure out how to keep this to a principles-based approach. So if you think about that a little bit, and if you have further thought, anybody has further thoughts on that, we would appreciate that input. Other hands up?
I see Kim. Kim?
Thank you. Thank you. Rich, just going back to the removal of off the shelf. During the NAS task force, we most definitely discussed off the shelf, and I believe we even made some revisions or qualifiers to off the shelf software software. And I'm just curious, or maybe if the task force can really reflect on again on the need to remove that. I'm just wondering with the SMP, SME group, whether removing that then provides some uncertainty as to whether it's allowed or not. One would say it is allowed. I think that probably the thought is that is anything really off the shelf that an accounting firm is implementing or installing directly out of the box. But I know that we had some thinking on that with the NAS task force, and I know we mentioned earlier, I heard earlier that we would be removing it, but now that I take a look at it a little bit more, I'm just wondering if that is the right way to go, to remove it, as opposed to leave that reference in. But
Okay,
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Lisbeth, you have another point?
Yeah, I just want to react to what Kim just said. Actually, my advanced comments are made exactly the same point. I don't think putting in an off-the-shelf simple software package would really create threats to independence. And I actually put in the different threats in my response to you, Rich, trying to come to see if there are any of these, but I really couldn't come up with it. And I agree with Kim that it could cause some issue in the space of SMPs.
Yeah, I understand. I think one of the other questions, though, is in this day and age with the advances in technology, is there really off-the-shelf software out there, or does it all not require significant customization? I mean, yes, there are probably some places that are still buying bookkeeping packages that you could slap into an individual server, but that might be the, you know, one of the, that may be a lot less common today than it might have been 25, 30 years ago.
I can still think of a very simple exact software package that is being used at a very small SME company. I really don't see an issue there with that.
Right, and that's why I said we're still allowing there to be safeguards. We're just saying we're moving it from what essentially was an automatic. You didn't need to be worried about it. But I hear you. We will definitely consider these points. Appreciate the input very much. Okay, I don't see any more hands, Jeff.
No.
No.
Okay, we had a couple other things that I wanted to just spend a moment on. If we could move forward to, actually, if we could just go ahead to slide 33. These are a couple of topics that we have thought about a little bit, given some consideration to. One was whether we're dealing with whether there should be something in custody of client assets, section 350. We actually spent some time looking at the definition of assets, and I think the task force view is at this point data is not an asset. We're not proposing a change in that area or to add something separate, because we thought we were addressing, we thought some of the hosting considerations could address that. And secondly, we recognize there was some discussion whether financial interests and bank and similar institutions consider a fit for the cyber security currencies. It didn't say this, it referenced exchanges, but there's an issue with wallets that you need to be aware of and sensitive to from an independent standpoint. But the definition of crypto is evolving. We're aware that the IESBA is looking at that. We at this point are not proposing to make changes specific to crypto. The next slide I alluded to earlier is that we do intend to make some edit in 950 to make it clear, if to the extent it isn't already, that as it relates to involvement with technology, and that if you are providing assurance attestation services, you should not have had involvement with the subject matter at hand, and that would include perhaps the design or implementation of that system. Now that does get into the fact that while you might have a non-financial system, you could do that work for it under 606, but if you're going to provide the attestation services under 950, then you should not have had involvement with the subject matter at hand, is the concept there. And then there was some reference in the initial phase 1 report to consider whether the use of the phrase office was still appropriate. We have looked at that. We would say that there has been some expression of confusion over why that even needed to be considered from the board. As we look at the actual definitions, the standard on the right side and the definition, we believe that it adequately addresses the fact that you need to take into consideration circumstances such as when the engagement partner is located in a different office. And it also recognizes that it's not just about a physical location or geography in the definition, but it also runs to how the audit firm manages its practices. So we think in general that the definition is sufficient and doesn't doesn't require a change. We're also aware that some other national standard setters apparently have been considering this and have also concluded that which they follow, I think, what we have in IESBA are not changing at this point. But I just wanted to reflect on those last couple of points and give the board an opportunity to weigh in or comment on those. Kim?
Okay.
Thanks, Rich. I'll start with office. I agree with you. I think that the definition that we have is fine. I actually, in the last month, had a conversation within my organization about the definition of office. And I think we came to the same conclusion that it's very workable under all these new circumstances. So I'm fine with that position. Just going back to the comment or the task force's determination that data is not an asset. Can you expand on that? I'm not quite sure whether I agree or disagree. I know if you Google data and assets, it'll come out that data is the biggest asset that any organization has. So I'd like to be able to reconcile that in my mind a little bit, maybe not right now, but I'm just curious as to why the task force came to that conclusion. And I guess if that is the board's position, at least under the code.
So it's
the data. Thanks.
Yeah, so we use the definition of assets in the IFRS standards, as well as we looked at the definition of assets in the conceptual framework that the FASB uses, and we also at least had some discussions with some practitioners that technically it does not meet the definition of an asset that would be reflected on the books and records. Having said that, that doesn't change our view on hosting. And we have contemplated whether there would be like a section 351 that would specifically address data and information. But I think the thinking was we could adequately deal with this through the prohibitions in 606, but certainly open for discussion.
Any other comment or question, please?
I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chairman. Rich?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just thank.
We have a.
We have a hand up. Thank you, Galen.
From Galen.
Yes.
Thank you. Just in terms of the presentation yesterday and in your slide there, we're talking about cryptocurrency and it's not cash. And I think yesterday they said that it's not a financial instrument. So, all of a sudden we have all of this Bitcoin and it's not an asset, but it's mined on the basis of data and algorithms. So I have to sort of chime in a little bit with Kim there that I'm a little bit confused on.
The crypto, Galen, that's a great question. Actually, the crypto itself is an asset. It's an intangible asset that meets the definition under both IFRS and FASB. Absolute data itself or intellectual property or those kinds of things don't currently directly meet the definition of asset. Again, I don't want to put too much into this because I think we can address what we were concerned about elsewhere, but we can we could in fact write like a 351 or even modify 350, but I wasn't sure that was getting at something that was that big of an issue. Now, I am I am personally concerned about the fact that people think about exchanges, but what they miss is where these people are keeping these assets. And in a lot of cases, there's a wallet, and that wallet holder is a third party. It doesn't mean they have access to your private keys and that, but they essentially custody the asset. And in those cases, that, you know, one could argue that, well, I think one does argue that's not all that different than a brokerage or an investment house that is custodying assets, and there's obviously considerations around that. So, but the crypto itself, it is clearly an intangible. We were more focused on whether we needed a section, at least this is where we were at, right or wrong. Did we need a section prohibiting the custody of data in order to deal with the hosting? And I think our answer was no, we could deal with the hosting without writing this section. It's maybe the basic plain English way I could get there. So
Fair enough, Rich. Thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Okay. Well, we don't seem to have another question, Rich. So
I would just thank everybody for the comments here as well as the comments sent in. I'll apologize in advance, but those who sent the comments in are likely going to get some calls to help us clarify and understand and seek input. But we will go through all of those as well as the ones verbalized here. And as we said, we wanted to get a lot of input tonight. We have a little ways to go before we come back with a more something closer to a complete product. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, and the task force and the staff. This was a very good presentation. It stimulated considerable and I thought very useful comment from the board. So I believe we're on the right track here. Before closing, I would like to ask Robert, our PIOB observer, Robert Buchanan, if he would like to make a comment here.
Thank you, Chair, and hello to everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be involved over the past 2 days. It's been absolutely fascinating and very valuable, I think, for all of us with the presentations, especially on the blockchain developments. It's about a year or 18 months since I've seen a blockchain presentation, and the thinking has developed so much since then, and that's great to see it, and quite a lot of resonance into the work that's already been done. For example, I picked up a link between what was said earlier today about partial reliance on technology and then the way the routine and mechanical concept is being dealt with in the straw man. So that's great. From a PIOB perspective, very pleasing to see the information gathering work and the collaboration that's happening between the task force and the working group. That's clearly going to work very well. And so congratulations on setting that up, and we'll look forward to seeing how that develops. And it's also great from our perspective to see the two boards collaborating with the presentation from the IESBA this morning and the work that's being done with a wide range of stakeholders. So no public interest issues to raise at this stage in respect of item 4, the working group, given that it's still at a fairly early stage in the work, but let's see how the questions coming out of the presentations are worked through. I'd like to give a very positive signal in respect of the task force's work and the discussion that's just happened in the last hour or so, and the board members' engagement with the questions that Rich has been putting forward. Pleased also to see the independence provisions being developed now, covering both the area of the close business relationship and those wider questions, which are clearly difficult about hosting and related activities, and appreciated listening to the discussion about hosting. There are some, I think, as I observed when I last attended the IESBA, and as I think Galen observed also, there are some pretty significant perception issues here around the firms providing these types of services to to audit clients, and I think the board acknowledges those and recognises it. But of course, those who don't necessarily understand the detail of the technology and exactly what is being done may still perceive that there's an independence problem there. So it's important to get the intentions right, and I'm sure that in the next phase that'll be accurately expressed in the drafting. And just one other point to mention, Rich, you did mention the 76-24% split in the stakeholder feedback, and the surprising 24% who didn't seem to have any concern about NAS in this area. And I think my colleague at the previous board meeting did draw attention to this, and we've noted it in our latest public interest statement on technology as well. So it's good to hear. I think I heard you say, Rich, that the task force has been talking to the regulatory group, which is good to hear, but we also noted the need to make sure that there is engagement with a wider range of stakeholders than just the profession, including corporates and governors. And so it'd be good to see perhaps at the next meeting or next time this comes back to the board a full summary of the outreach that you've undertaken before you get to the point of exposure. So thank you, Chair. It's been a very good session, and I'm pleased to have have the opportunity to make these brief comments.
Thank you very much, Robert. And again, thanks to the board and to the presenters, the working group and the task force on technology. I think this was quite a productive session today. And we are ready for our third session, which is going to be for some of us the same day today, for some of you tomorrow, at 9 a.m. New York time, if I'm right. So we'll see you soon. Get a good rest and see you. Goodbye. Thank you all.
Good morning.
You well.